Chapter 261, Reka Soliene, 3. Arthur Nightingale. Even with his near-total absence from social media, his name was practically legend, thanks, in no small part, to the three princesses and the noble girl who constantly surrounded him. He was a walking enigma, someone who thrived in the spaces between public spectacle and total obscurity. A shadow that occasionally stepped into the light, only to retreat again before anyone could truly make sense of what they'd seen. Of course, I knew him. More than that, I remembered him. He had tried to recruit me into Ouroboros once, offering a deal that had been too good, something that had stuck in my mind long after I refused. His eyes that day, penetrating, calculating, as if dissecting my very essence, had haunted my dreams for weeks afterward. At the time, I hadn't understood why he was interested in me. But now. Did he know? The thought chilled me to my core, ice spreading through my veins. Had he known this would happen? Had he somehow seen what even I hadn't known about myself? Had he been planning this moment all along, like a chess master positioning pieces 20 moves ahead? I pushed the thought away, my hands trembling slightly. That was impossible. No one could have predicted something like this. Not even him. Right? You know, Milia spoke, her voice even, controlled, but there was a tightness in her throat now, a barely perceptible quiver that betrayed her rising panic. Her family will die. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and poisonous. Arthur's blade pressed a fraction deeper against her skin, drawing a thin, crimson line that trickled down her throat. The steel gleamed under the harsh lights, hungry. He could kill her in an instant, a simple flick of his wrist, and her life would end. My heart hammered against my ribs, the sound thundering in my ears. No. Save my family. The words ripped out of me, raw and desperate, clawing their way up my throat like a wounded animal. My eyes burned with unshed tears, my voice cracking under the weight of my fear. Arthur sighed, shaking his head like a teacher unimpressed with a student's lack of faith. The gesture was so casual, so at odds with the life-or-death stakes surrounding us, that it sent a jolt of cold fury through me. Did you really think I wouldn't account for something like that? His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a quiet certainty that sent a cold shiver down my spine, like fingers of ice tracing my vertebrae one by one. Look closely, Reka, he said, his gaze never leaving mine, compelling me to obey. My gaze snapped to the hologram, my breath caught in my throat, my pulse a deafening roar in my ears. The image flickered, static dancing across its surface like lightning through storm clouds. And then a flash of light erupted across the screen, so bright it seared my retinas, forcing me to blink away the afterimages. The scene shifted, the transition jarring. Arthur appeared. Not here, but there. In the place where my family was being held, their faces drawn with fear, bodies rigid with tension. And he was freeing them, his movements swift and precise, cutting through restraints as if they were made of paper. But that didn't make sense. Because he was also here, standing before me, blade pressed against Milia's throat, her life balanced on the edge of his sword. I turned, my breath catching in my throat, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin. How? The word was barely more than a whisper, dragged from my lips by confusion and dawning hope. Arthur met my gaze, his expression amused, almost pitying, as if I were a child struggling to grasp a simple concept. The hologram is showing a recorded video, after all. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. Then. Impossible. Milia's voice cracked, splintering like glass, her entire body going rigid, tendons standing out in stark relief against her skin. There is no way a kid like you could have found the hiding place, recorded a video, and replaced it without us knowing. That's just not possible. Her words tumbled out, frantic, desperate, the last protests of someone watching their carefully constructed world crumble around them. Arthur tilted his head slightly, like he was considering her words, a predator toying with its prey. Then he smiled, a slow, terrible thing that never reached his eyes. Of course, he said, each syllable dripping with condescension, for someone like you, it isn't. Milia opened her mouth. And never finished. Because her head wasn't attached to her body anymore. I barely even saw the movement, just a silver blur, too fast for my eyes to track. One moment, Arthur was standing there, blade at her throat, his posture relaxed, almost bored. The next. Her head was gone. A clean cut. A perfect execution. No hesitation, no wasted motion. Blood erupted in a crimson fountain, arcing through the air in a gruesome spray before splattering against the pristine walls with a sickening wetness. Her body swayed for half a second, a macabre dance, before collapsing with a dull thud that seemed to reverberate through my bones. I couldn't breathe. My lungs refused to work, frozen in horror. I had seen people die before, but not like this. Not with such ease, such casual, terrifying efficiency. It was like watching someone swat a fly, a minor nuisance dealt with and forgotten in the same heartbeat. Arthur simply exhaled, flicking the blood off his sword with a practiced twist of his wrist, droplets flying through the air like rubies before spattering on the floor. His expression hadn't changed, as if he had just finished an inconvenient chore rather than ending a human life. He looked at me, his gaze boring into mine, stripping away defenses I didn't know I had. And he smiled, the curve of his lips a promise and a threat all at once. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out a small communication device. "Did you get them to safety?" he asked. A voice crackled through. "Yes. The family is secure at the safe house. Jean is with them now." Arthur nodded, satisfied. He slipped the device back into his pocket and turned to Rekha, who was staring at him with a mixture of horror and confusion. "How did you?" she began. "The cult has patterns," Arthur explained. "Once I identified you as their target, I knew they'd try to control you through your family. So I had Jean track their movements the moment they arrived in Redmond 3 days ago. The cult's operatives were following them from the instant they stepped into the city." He gestured to the room around them. This confrontation was inevitable. They always use the same playbook: threaten what you love, break your will, bend you to their purpose. His eyes hardened. I simply ensured I was one step ahead. He turned his gaze back to her, his expression softening slightly. "I'll offer it again. Will you join my guild, Ouroboros?" I exhaled sharply, the air hissing between my teeth. My limbs still ached, my body still felt like it had been dragged through hell, every nerve ending screaming in protest, and now this? This impossible choice, this moment that would define everything that came after? "If I don't," I asked, staring at him, searching for any hint of deception, any crack in his perfect facade, "will I die here?" Arthur scratched the side of his cheek, looking almost sheepish, the gesture so incongruously normal that it sent another wave of dissonance crashing through me. "You still don't trust me?" I scowled, my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave crescent-shaped indentations in the flesh. He sighed, nodding as if my reaction was perfectly expected, perfectly catalogued in his mental playbook. "I suppose that's normal." Then, without missing a beat, he knelt before me, his movements fluid, graceful, like a dancer performing a well-rehearsed routine. "I promise that no matter the response I get from Rekha Solian, I shall not harm her, her family members, nor any of her friends or loved ones as an act of revenge for refusing to join my guild, Ouroboros. I, Arthur Nightingale, vow this on my very mana." I stiffened, a jolt running through me as the implications sank in, as the weight of his words pressed down on me. "You're making a mana oath?" I muttered, disbelief coloring every syllable. He nodded, his expression solemn, but something flickered in his eyes, something I couldn't quite name, couldn't quite grasp. Mana oaths weren't things people threw around lightly. The moment those words were spoken and meant, the mana itself became a binding force, an unbreakable chain. Breaking an oath like that didn't just mean losing magic, it meant death, a true death, the kind that couldn't be bargained with, couldn't be escaped. It was final in a way few things in our world were. I turned my gaze downward, unable to meet his eyes any longer. My fists clenched, nails biting deeper, the pain a welcome distraction from the chaos of my thoughts. "Why?" I asked, voice quiet, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Because I'm a weapon you need? Because you think this will convince me?" Arthur shrugged, the casual gesture at odds with the gravity of the moment. "Maybe. Maybe not." His voice was calm, but there was something else beneath it. Something raw, something wounded. "But I know what it means to drown, Rekha. I know what it feels like to be powerless. To not be able to fight back against something larger than yourself." I looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit, any hint that this was just another manipulation, another layer of his endless schemes. And he looked back, his gaze steady, unflinching. "You want revenge, don't you?" he said, the words slipping out like a challenge, like a blade sliding between ribs to find the heart. "You want to kill the bishop. You want to burn the cult behind all of this to the ground. You want power, don't you? Power so great that the world itself bows before you." My breath hitched, the air catching in my throat as his words found purchase in the darkest corners of my soul, in the places I had hidden even from myself. Arthur leaned forward slightly, eyes gleaming in the dim light. "Then I will give it to you." Chapter 262, Rekha Solian, 4. His voice was smooth, hypnotic, but there was steel beneath it. A certainty that shouldn't have been possible for someone his age, someone who had walked the earth for such a brief time. "Ouroboros will reach the absolute zenith of all guilds," he continued, each word falling like a hammer on an anvil, shaping something new, something dangerous. "The peak of the world itself. Give me your blood and sweat, and I will reward you with vengeance." His expression darkened, shadows gathering around him like loyal servants, something dangerous flickering in his eyes, a glimpse of something vast and hungry that lived behind the human mask he wore. "Because when I needed it," he murmured, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the entire room, "no one extended a hand to me." Before I could respond, before I could even process the weight of his words, the sharp, metallic scent of blood hit my nostrils, stronger than before, overwhelming. It coated my tongue, filled my lungs, made me want to gag. Arthur's expression darkened as he rose to his feet, the easy confidence in his posture never wavering, but something in his eyes changed, hardened, focused, like a blade being drawn. My breath, however, hitched, caught on the edge of a silent scream. I felt it. Not just the presence, not just the mana, something deeper. A sensation that slithered through my body, clawing at the edges of my mind, digging up something I had long since buried beneath layers of denial and forced forgetfulness. Fear. Not the everyday fear of pain or failure. No, this was something older, something primal. The kind of fear that didn't just shake your hands or quicken your pulse, but unmade you, cell by cell, memory by memory, until there was nothing left but the animal need to escape, to run, to hide. My nerves twisted, my muscles clenched, my very soul recoiled, trying to retreat from the physical confines of my body. And I knew what it was. Blood magic. A foul, ancient power, vampiric in nature, honed to perfection over countless sacrifices. And it was coming from him, radiating outward in pulsing waves that seemed to distort the very air. Bishop Vale stood there, his aura thick with it, suffocating, wrong, like breathing in shards of glass. His presence alone seemed to lower the temperature in the room, frost forming at the edges of my vision. "You are dangerous," the bishop mused, his gaze settling on Arthur, assessing, calculating the value of the life before him. To use Carrie like that. To outmaneuver me while my attention was elsewhere. Dangerous, dangerous. Each repetition of the word sent another spike of dread through me, another reminder that we were trapped here with a monster wearing human skin. Then, his eyes narrowed slightly, predatory. "However, a part of your plan failed, didn't it?" The question hung in the air, edged with malice, with the promise of retribution. Arthur tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable, a perfect mask. "Perhaps." Then, without hesitation, without warning, he placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch sending a jolt through me. And just like that, the fear lessened. Not gone. Not entirely erased. but dulled, quieted, as if someone had stepped between me and the monster in the dark, as if a shield had been raised between my mind and the creeping horror that threatened to consume it. My breath slowed. My body steadied. The room came back into focus, edges sharpening, colors brightening. Even now, he was helping me. How? How was that possible? The question echoed in my mind, bouncing off the walls of my skull, demanding an answer I couldn't provide. You truly are remarkable, the bishop continued, watching Arthur like a scholar studying a rare specimen, like a butcher appraising meat. Your mind, your schemes, your understanding of the game, impeccable. Then his lips curled, revealing a flash of teeth too sharp, too numerous to be entirely human. But your strength is lacking. Did you honestly think you could defeat me alone? Arthur exhaled, a soft sound that somehow carried more weight than it should have, shaking his head as if disappointed by the bishop's lack of insight. Normally? No. Not normally, the bishop scoffed, his eyes gleaming with a hungry light, blood-red sparks dancing in their depths. Not ever. Arthur merely smiled. A small, knowing smile that sent ice crawling up my spine. The bishop's brows twitched, the first crack in his composure, a hairline fracture in the facade of absolute control. Arthur tilted his head slightly, the gesture almost playful. But you're not at full strength, are you? He said, his voice almost teasing, a child poking at a caged beast. After dealing with Carrie, I imagine that took quite a bit out of you. A flicker of something passed through the bishop's expression, there and gone in an instant. Annoyance? Doubt? Uncertainty? It was brief, barely there, a shadow crossing the sun, but Arthur caught it. I knew he did. I could see it in the subtle shift of his posture, the almost imperceptible tightening of his grip on his sword. The bishop scowled, the expression transforming his features into something inhuman, something carved from hatred and hunger. Enough. With a snarl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building, his blood astral energy surged forward, a crimson tide of sheer destruction, roaring toward Arthur like a beast unleashed from ancient chains. The air itself seemed to scream, molecules tearing apart under the onslaught of power. I opened my mouth to cry out, to warn him, the words burning in my throat. But Arthur's lips curled further, his stance relaxed, almost welcoming. And then the blood magic vanished. Not dodged. Not countered. Not blocked. Engulfed. Swallowed whole by a vast, endless darkness that seemed to pour from Arthur's very being, a void so complete it seemed to devour light itself. The silence that followed was absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight, like the moment before a storm breaks, when the world holds its breath in anticipation of the coming fury. And in that silence, Arthur smiled. And then, it appeared. By Arthur's side, a figure rose from the shadows, its presence thick and heavy, pressing against the edges of reality itself. A lich. A towering, robed monstrosity of bone and decay, its hollow sockets burning with an eerie, unnatural glow. I had never seen one before. Most people hadn't. Liches were the stuff of legends, nightmare creatures spoken of in hushed voices, wielders of magic that defied life itself. And yet, here it was. And it had been summoned by a boy 2 years younger than me. Ridiculous. My gaze snapped to Arthur. He stood there, unbothered, completely at ease in the presence of a creature that should not exist. Did he want this? A one-on-one against a bishop of the Red Chalice cult? That wasn't just reckless. That was insanity. I clenched my fists, my mind racing. The gap between them was massive. Vale was an ascendant ranker, a bishop, someone who had climbed the ranks of a cult that had no room for weakness. He wasn't just strong. He was experienced. Refined. Arthur was, what? A 16-year-old prodigy with a dangerous amount of confidence? Do you not trust me? Arthur's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp and sudden. I blinked, caught off guard. He smirked. Don't worry. I wanted to kill this bastard myself anyway. And then, his mana shifted. Not gradually. Not subtly. One moment, it was stable. The next, it doubled. The sheer weight of it hit me like a wave. He's completed the second stage of the integration process, I realized. That was no small feat. His mana had condensed, refined itself into something denser, something sharper. But still. I won't wait any longer, Bishop Vale growled, his patience finally snapping. He raised his staff to the sky, blood astral energy twisting around him in thick, writhing tendrils. Arthur tilted his head. Well, he said, smiling, your waiting gave me exactly the chance I needed to kill you. I swallowed, my pulse hammering in my throat. Why don't you just leave me? I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Why don't you just survive on your own? Arthur glanced at me, and in that instant, his expression softened, just slightly. Because it's not worth it, he said simply, if I don't save you. And then. The space around them warped. Chapter 263, Bishop Vale, 1. The power gap between me and the bishop wasn't just vast, it was insurmountable. Despite the injuries Carrie inflicted upon him, the massive gap still existed. And I knew that. But knowing didn't change anything. The cold reality settled in my stomach like lead, yet my grip on my sword remained steady, unwavering despite the tremors threatening to overtake my limbs. I just had to hold on. Because that was all it took to make the impossible possible. One moment. One chance. That's all I needed. The air around us twisted, reality bending under the weight of something far greater than just mana. Colors inverted, then dulled to monochrome before bleeding back into existence, distorted and wrong. The very fabric of space seemed to fold in on itself, creating pockets of nothingness that swallowed sound. Bishop Vale's eyes gleamed with curiosity, a predatory light dancing in their depths. Is this a domain? His voice carried no fear, only intrigue, like a scientist observing an unexpected phenomenon beneath his microscope. Something to be studied, dissected, understood. He exhaled slowly, his grip on his staff loosening ever so slightly, the ornate wood gleaming with a sickly crimson light that pulsed in time with an unseen heartbeat. A supernatural domain. How interesting. His gaze flickered to my side, where the translucent form of the lich hovered, skeletal fingers weaving complex patterns through the air, its hollow eye sockets burning with ethereal fire. Ah. I assume this is the gift of your lich? He smiled, but it wasn't pleasant, all teeth and no warmth, like a wound carved into flesh. Incredible. Truly. He looked back at me, the amusement in his expression curdling into something sharper, more dangerous. You are a terrifying talent, Arthur Nightingale. Given time, you could become a threat. A real one. His eyes darkened, pupils expanding until they nearly swallowed the iris. Unfortunately, you are far from my level. He raised his staff, the wood creaking as if alive, hungry, and the air grew thick with the scent of copper and decay. I moved. My muscles bunched, propelling me forward with every ounce of speed I could muster, pure light blazing along my blade as I prepared to strike. Too late. A tide of blood-forged mana erupted from his fingertips, twisting and surging toward me in an unrelenting wave. It wasn't just raw power, it was intelligent, alive in a way magic shouldn't be, tendrils of crimson energy seeking me out like predators sending prey. I barely had time to react, to shift my stance. I raised my sword, pure light blazing along its edge as I swung down, cutting a diagonal arc through the air, the blade leaving trails of white fire in its wake. Impact. The sheer force rattled through my arms, my bones screaming in protest as the shock traveled up from my hands to my shoulders, then down my spine. I gritted my teeth, barely holding my ground as the wave of magic crashed against me, pushing me back, forcing my feet to slide against the warped ground of the domain. My heels dug furrows into the floor, the pressure building with each passing second. The only reason I wasn't already dead was the armor that clung to me like a second skin, Erebus's bone armor. The midnight black plates absorbed some of the impact, glowing with a dull purple light as they consumed the energy directed at me. Even so, the pressure was unbearable, like being caught in the path of an avalanche, the weight threatening to crush me completely. The bishop wasn't even trying. His expression remained relaxed, almost bored, as he directed the tide of blood magic with casual flicks of his fingers, as if conducting an orchestra rather than attempting to obliterate a human being. I shifted my stance, digging deeper, summoning more of my own mana to reinforce the blade. The pure light responded, burning brighter, pushing back against the tide, but it wasn't enough. For every inch I gained, the bishop's power surged again, forcing me back 2 more. Enough of this farce, he sighed, his voice tinged with irritation, like he was putting down a particularly annoying pet. His mana shifted, condensing. Astral energy. Raw. Overwhelming. A tsunami compared to the mere wave he'd sent before. And then he attacked the domain itself. The space around us shuddered, cracks forming at the very edges of my perception, spreading like spiderwebs across the fabric of reality. Light spilled through these fractures, normal light from the world outside, piercing the veil of the domain. The lich hissed, a sound like dry leaves scraping across stone, its skeletal fingers twitching as it strained to hold the domain together, to maintain the pocket of altered reality it had created. I watched the cracks spread further, my time running out as the domain began to collapse. Now or never. I lunged forward, pushing off the ground with such force that the floor beneath me cratered, sending chunks of debris flying. Desperation. A last-ditch effort. My sword struck out, a flash of pure light arcing through the air as I aimed for the junction where his neck met his shoulder, a killing blow if it landed. Blocked. A single flick of his staff deflected my strike, the wood meeting metal with a sound like thunder. The impact sent a shockwave through my arms, my wrist nearly snapping under the sheer weight of it. The force of the collision created a blast of air that rippled outward, disturbing the dust that had settled on the floor. I twisted in mid-air, using the momentum from the deflection to spin, attempting to bring my blade around in a horizontal slash at his midsection, my body contorting in ways that shouldn't have been possible for a normal human. The bishop moved with impossible grace, stepping back just enough that my blade missed by millimeters, close enough that it severed a loose thread from his robes. Predictable, he murmured, his voice a low rumble that somehow cut through the chaos of battle. I landed, my boots skidding across the floor, and immediately launched into another attack, a feint high, then dropping low to sweep at his legs. The bishop didn't even bother to dodge the feint, seeing through it instantly, and simply raised his foot as my blade swept beneath, like a dancer performing a well-rehearsed routine. In the split second of vulnerability as my blade passed harmlessly beneath him, he struck. His staff blurred, the wood elongating, shifting, becoming something more sinister. I brought my sword up to parry, but the staff changed direction mid-strike, curving around my defenses like a living thing. I barely managed to land on my feet, but the moment I regained balance, he was already there. One moment, he stood 3 paces away. The next, he materialized before me, the air distorting around his form as if reality itself bent to accommodate his presence. His hands shot forward. A blur of motion. A precise strike. I dodged, or I thought I did, throwing myself to the side, my reflexes pushed to their absolute limit. Pain exploded in my ribs. A glancing blow, and still, it felt like being hit by a wrecking ball. Something cracked beneath my armor, a sharp, sickening sound that resonated through my chest. The force sent me flying, tumbling across the floor like a discarded doll. I hit the ground, hard, my breath ripped from my lungs in a violent exhale. Stars exploded behind my eyes, reality fragmenting into pieces that refused to come back together. Dark spots swam in my vision. My fingers twitched around my sword, my mind struggling to catch up, to process what had happened. How had he moved so fast? How had he predicted exactly where I would dodge? I couldn't keep up. This was what it meant to fight someone above you. Not a battle. Not a struggle. A lesson in inevitability. Like trying to hold back the tide with your bare hands, like trying to outrun an avalanche. I tried to rise, pushing myself up on trembling arms. Blood dripped from my lips, spattering on the floor beneath me, each drop a testament to the gap between us. My armor had cracked in places, hairline fractures running through the once immaculate surface, deep dark leaking from the gaps like smoke. Pathetic, the bishop muttered, twirling his staff with casual grace, his robes swirling around him in defiance of gravity itself. You've impressed me, Arthur Nightingale. But tricks only get you so far. He advanced slowly, deliberately, each step resonating with purpose. I could feel his mana building again, gathering like storm clouds on the horizon, promising devastation. I gasped for breath, pushing myself up, my entire body screaming in protest. My left arm hung at an odd angle, likely dislocated from the impact. I rolled my shoulder back, forcing the joint into place with a sickening pop that sent fresh waves of agony cascading through me. I needed something. Something more. Something else. The domain was failing, the walls between realities thinning with each passing second. The Lich's power was fading, its form becoming more transparent, more ethereal. Soon, it would collapse entirely, and with it, any advantage it had given me. My gaze darted toward her. Rekha stood at the edge of the fading domain, her eyes wide with horror, her body trembling as she watched the one-sided battle unfold. Even from here, I could see the faint outline of symbols pulsing beneath her skin, a power waiting to be unleashed. Rekha! I called, my voice hoarse, broken, yet somehow carrying across the distance between us. She froze, like a deer caught in headlights, her breath visibly hitching in her chest. The bishop's attention flicked toward her as well, his eyes narrowing as he assessed this new factor in the equation. His lips curled in a smirk, as if he'd discovered the punchline to a joke only he understood. Her fists clenched, her body trembling as black ink letters shimmered into existence on her skin, pulsing, waiting. They crawled up her arms like living things, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly, symbols from a language never meant for human tongues. I met her eyes across the battlefield, holding her gaze with an intensity that transcended the chaos around us. Use it on me. Chapter 264, Bishop Vale, 2. Her breath hitched, a small, broken sound that somehow carried over the din of battle. What? The word escaped her lips like a prayer, like a plea. Now. I roared, the command tearing itself from my throat with a force that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The bishop turned back to me, his eyes glinting with newfound interest, like a collector who had just spotted a rare specimen. He raised his staff again, the wood humming with power, with promise. I raised my sword in defiance, pure light flickering along its length, struggling to maintain its brilliance as my strength waned. My stance was wide, unstable, my body betraying me as blood loss and exhaustion took their toll. Gifts weren't meant to be shared. That was the rule. The fundamental law. No one could transfer the core of their gift to another, it was part of them, bound to their very existence. Like trying to give away your heartbeat, like trying to lend someone your breath. Impossible. Unthinkable. The only known exception was Rachel. Her gift could be given freely, like a blessing, like sunlight spilling over the world. A miracle made flesh, a law unto herself. Mine, Lucent Harmony, could do it too. Technically. It was inefficient. Wasteful. A glorified trick. Most of the time, it wasn't worth the effort, the power lost in the transfer reducing it to a pale shadow of its true potential. But Rekha's gift? Her gift was something different. Something raw. Something that bent the rules in a way nothing else did. A contradiction, an impossibility, a glitch in the fabric of reality itself. Because Rekha's gift didn't just enhance her strength or sharpen her senses. It changed her very foundation. Her mana rank itself. Right now, she had forced herself from light yellow rank to white rank. A temporary surge, an unnatural leap forward. An impossible increase, like skipping 5 rungs on a ladder in a single bound. The only gift in existence that could do that. The bishop launched another attack, this one more focused, more precise, a spear of condensed blood magic that cut through the air with a sound like a banshee's wail, aimed directly at my heart. I twisted, barely avoiding it, the spear grazing my shoulder and leaving a trail of searing pain in its wake. The wound hissed and bubbled, the blood magic trying to burrow deeper, to consume me from within. No. Rekha shook her head violently, panic flashing across her face, her eyes wild with fear. The suffering. The dread. You can't. The black symbols on her skin writhed faster, more agitated, responding to her emotional state. Tendrils of darkness curled around her limbs, like chains, like shackles. I must, I said. My voice didn't waver, despite the blood bubbling up in my throat, despite the edges of my vision growing darker by the second. Please. The bishop stalked closer, his patience wearing thin, his power building to a crescendo that promised oblivion. With each step, the ground beneath him blackened and withered, as if life itself retreated from his presence. I staggered back, raising my sword again, but the motion lacked conviction, lacked strength. The pure light was dimming, flickering like a candle in a storm, moments from being extinguished completely. Rekha looked at me, eyes wild with disbelief, with something that might have been betrayal. Are you doing this just to save me? The question hung in the air between us, weighted with implications, with unspoken emotions. Time seemed to slow, the chaos of battle receding as I held her gaze across the distance that separated us. No, I shook my head, the answer slipping out without hesitation, without artifice. I'm doing this for myself. Her breath hitched, a small, wounded sound that somehow cut through the noise of battle, through the roaring in my ears. I was selfish. I had always been selfish, taking what I needed, using what was offered, all in service to a goal that sometimes seemed more like an obsession than a purpose. I wanted love when I didn't deserve it. I wanted love with someone I didn't deserve. And I wanted to burn down the world that dared to harm the tiny, fragile thing that made life more than survival. This thing called happiness. I wasn't doing this because I cared about Rekha. This was payback. Against a world that saw children as nothing more than tools to break and reshape. Against a world that thought it was fine to take something innocent and twist it into something useful, something profitable, something with purpose beyond mere existence. Because when I looked at her, I saw myself. The child I had been. The broken thing I had become. The monster I had made of myself to survive. And that was something I couldn't ignore, couldn't turn away from, couldn't pretend didn't matter. Give it to me. The bishop lunged, his patience finally exhausted, his staff spinning in complex patterns that left trails of blood-red light in the air, forming sigils that burned themselves into reality itself. I braced myself, knowing I couldn't dodge, couldn't block, couldn't hope to survive what was coming. I wasn't a hero. I didn't deserve to be a hero. But that didn't stop me from wanting, just once, to save someone from the same fate. To shield one person from the darkness that had consumed me, that had made me what I was. Rekha clenched her fists, her knuckles white with strain, indecision warring across her features. Then, slowly, her hands unclenched, fingers splaying wide as if releasing something invisible. She exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to carry the weight of a decision that couldn't be unmade. Her eyes shut, lashes fluttering against pale cheeks, and I felt it. The black letters on her skin moved, slithering across her flesh like living ink, detaching themselves one by one. They hovered in the air between us, pulsing with a rhythm that matched no heartbeat, that followed no pattern known to human minds. And then they shot toward me, a swarm of darkness that cut through the fading domain like arrows through mist. Pain. Not the kind that made you wince. Not the kind that left bruises or fractures or bleeding wounds. The kind that unmade you. The kind that boiled you alive from the inside out, that rewrote your very being one agonizing atom at a time. The symbols burrowed into my skin, merging with my flesh, becoming part of me in a way that defied description. Each one brought with it a new dimension of suffering, a new layer of agony that transcended physical sensation. Every cell in my body screamed, a chorus of torment that threatened to shatter my mind, to reduce me to nothing more than a vessel for pain itself. And I smiled. Because in exchange, I took her power. The black symbols settled into my flesh, pulsing with a rhythm that gradually synchronized with my heartbeat, becoming extensions of my will, of my being. And my mana rose. Low integration rank. The first surge was like a dam breaking, power flooding through channels never meant to contain such forces. My vision blurred, colors shifting, becoming more vivid, more intense. The air around me crackled with energy, with potential. Then, mid-integration rank. The second surge was stronger, more violent. My muscles bulged, veins standing out in stark relief against my skin as power coursed through me like liquid fire. The Erebus bone armor responded, shifting, expanding, becoming more elaborate, more complete, as if awakening from a slumber. I could feel it. Every fiber of my being stretching, cracking, reshaping itself under the sheer weight of power flooding through me. Bones reinforced themselves, muscles densified, neural pathways rewired for increased speed, increased processing. The bishop faltered, his attack hesitating mid-formation as he sensed the change, as he realized something had fundamentally shifted in the dynamic between us. "This is the limit," Luna's voice echoed in my mind, cool and detached, a reminder of boundaries that couldn't be crossed, of lines that shouldn't be blurred. I exhaled, tasting blood, metallic and warm, a physical reminder of the price being paid for this borrowed power. "I know." And I raised my sword once more, pure light blazing along its length with renewed vigor, burning so bright it cast no shadows, only pure, unfiltered radiance. The bishop's eyes widened, a fraction of genuine surprise crossing his features before his mask of confidence reasserted itself. "Interesting," he murmured, adjusting his stance, his grip on his staff tightening. "Very interesting indeed." I didn't respond. I moved. Chapter 265, Bishop Vale, 3. 5 Stages of Swordsmanship. Sword intent was the first level, imbuing one's blade with purpose. I had mastered that years ago, forcing my will into the metal until the blade became an extension of my thoughts. But this was different. As I slashed forward, the blade seemed to sing, a high, clear note that cut through the chaos of battle. My sword vibrated with each strike, not from impact but from something deeper, something more fundamental. Sword resonance. The second level of swordsmanship, where the blade began to vibrate with the swordsman's intent, amplifying each strike through harmonic frequencies that existed between wielder and weapon. It shouldn't have been possible for me normally. But Reika's gift had pushed me temporarily into mid-integration rank, and with it came access to techniques that would normally be beyond my reach. The bishop blocked my first strike, his staff intercepting my blade with precision, but this time, the impact was different. My sword hummed against his weapon, the vibration traveling through the staff and into his hands. I saw a flicker of discomfort cross his features, his grip adjusting to compensate. "Sword resonance," he murmured, genuine surprise coloring his tone. "At your age?" I pressed the advantage, not wasting breath on words, each strike flowing into the next in a continuous sequence of motion. The pure light that surrounded my blade pulsed with each vibration, creating a strobe-like effect that made tracking the weapon's path difficult even for someone of the bishop's caliber. For a brief, glorious moment, I matched him, strike for strike, step for step, our weapons blurring as we exchanged blows at speeds that would have been impossible for me just minutes before. But it wasn't enough. The bishop's initial surprise faded quickly, his movements adjusting to counter my newfound technique. His staff blurred, intercepting each strike with precise counters that diffused the vibrations, neutralizing the advantage of sword resonance through sheer skill and experience. "A temporary boost," he noted, his voice calm despite the increased pace of our exchange. "Impressive, but fleeting." He was right. I could already feel Reika's gift burning through my system at an alarming rate. The black symbols on my skin pulsed faster, some already beginning to fade as their power was consumed. The borrowed mana was a wildfire, beautiful but unsustainable, burning too hot and too fast to last. And the bishop knew it. He began to press forward, his attacks becoming more aggressive, more calculated. No longer satisfied with simply countering my strikes, he launched his own offensive, each movement flowing into the next with the precision of someone who had mastered their craft centuries ago. I parried a thrust aimed at my throat, the impact sending vibrations up my arm despite the sword resonance. My next counter was a fraction slower than it should have been, the borrowed power already beginning to wane. The domain around us was collapsing faster now. The Lich's power stretched to its limit as it tried to maintain the altered reality while simultaneously feeding energy into the Erebus bone armor that protected me. I needed more. The realization hit me with cold certainty. I was still losing, just more slowly than before. Erebus, I whispered, the name passing my lips like a prayer. The Lich's spectral form wavered, its hollow eye sockets fixing on me with an intensity that transcended death itself. Release your full power. I felt rather than heard its response, a warning, a caution, the knowledge that my body wasn't ready to channel that level of energy, that doing so could tear me apart from the inside. I know, I said, my voice steady despite the blood dripping from the corner of my mouth. Do it anyway. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Then, everything did. The Lich's form seemed to implode, collapsing in on itself until it was nothing more than a pinpoint of darkness, a singularity of negative space that defied perception. Then, that point expanded, not outward but into me, merging with my being in a way that the previous bone armor had only hinted at. Darkness flooded my system, cool and ancient, bringing with it memories that weren't mine, centuries of existence, of watching civilizations rise and fall, of accumulating knowledge that was never meant for mortal minds. The Erebus's bone armor transformed, no longer simply covering my body but becoming my body, the distinction between armor and flesh blurring until there was no clear separation. Plates of midnight black bone sprouted from my skin, forming an exoskeleton of impossible geometry. The domain, rather than collapsing, stabilized, but changed. The space around us darkened, stars appearing in the void above, a cosmic emptiness that swallowed sound and light alike. This wasn't just an alteration of local reality anymore, it was a pocket dimension unto itself, a space where the normal rules of physics bent to accommodate the will of its creator. A higher domain of a lich, the bishop whispered, and for the first time, I heard a note of genuine concern in his voice. A death space. I lunged forward, my movements blurring beyond what should have been possible even with Reika's gift. The sword in my hand had changed too, its blade now wreathed in a combination of pure light and shadow, opposing forces that should have annihilated each other instead coexisting in impossible harmony. The bishop raised his staff, blood magic surging to counter my attack, but I was already elsewhere, appearing behind him in a flicker of shadow, my blade descending in an arc that would have severed his spine if it had connected. But it didn't. Even with Erebus's full power flowing through me, even with sword resonance amplifying each strike, even with the domain warping reality to my advantage, the bishop was still faster, still more skilled, still more powerful. He twisted, his staff intercepting my blade at the last possible moment, the impact creating a shockwave that rippled through the domain itself. The force of the collision sent me skidding backward, my feet leaving trails in the ground as I struggled to maintain my balance. Impressive, the bishop acknowledged, but there was a new tension in his stance, a readiness that hadn't been there before. You forced me to take you seriously. He raised his staff, and the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of blood and decay. His astral energy manifested fully now, a crimson tide that swirled around him like a hurricane, distorting the very fabric of the domain with its intensity. I knew what was coming. I could feel Reika's gift fading rapidly now, the black symbols on my skin dissolving one by one, the borrowed power returning to its rightful owner. Erebus's full power was consuming me from within, the price for channeling such energy without adequate preparation becoming evident in the way my vision blurred, in the way blood vessels ruptured beneath my skin. But I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when I was so close. I charged forward, sword raised, pure light resonating along its length as I poured everything I had into one final attack. The sword resonance reached a fever pitch, the blade vibrating so rapidly it became a blur even to my enhanced perception, the sound it produced rising beyond the range of human hearing. The bishop met my charge head-on, his staff whirling in patterns too complex to follow, each movement precise, each angle calculated to maximum effect. Blood magic surged forward, a tidal wave of crimson energy that threatened to consume everything in its path. Our weapons met. The collision was cataclysmic. For a single, breathless moment, we were evenly matched, his overwhelming power against my borrowed strength and desperate techniques, a perfect equilibrium of opposing forces. Then the balance shifted. I felt it first in my arms, a tremor that started in my fingertips and spread upward, my muscles failing under the strain of channeling too much power for too long. The sword resonance faltered, the blade's vibration becoming erratic, disharmonious. The bishop smiled, sensing weakness, and pressed forward. His staff whirled, striking my sword with such force that cracks appeared along its length, the metal groaning under pressure it was never designed to withstand. Pure light flickered, dimming as my concentration wavered, as exhaustion and pain threatened to overwhelm me. I was pushed back, step by step, the ground beneath me crumbling as the bishop's power overwhelmed my defenses. The Erebus bone armor began to fracture, pieces falling away like autumn leaves, the connection to the lich weakening as my own strength failed. Blood magic seeped through the cracks in my defenses, burning wherever it touched, eating away at flesh and bone with equal hunger. I gritted my teeth against the pain, refusing to cry out, refusing to give him the satisfaction of hearing my suffering. But it wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. The bishop approached slowly, unhurried, his staff tapping against the ground with each step. There was no triumph in his expression, no gloating, just the calm certainty of someone who had known the outcome from the beginning. "You understand now," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle. "The gap between us." I tried to rise, to defy him even in defeat, but my body refused to obey, muscles spasming as the last of Reika's gift burned away, as the consequences of channeling Erebus's full power made themselves known in agonizing detail. The bishop raised his staff, astral energy gathering at its tip, a sphere of condensed blood magic that hummed with deadly intent. A valiant effort, he acknowledged. But ultimately futile. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, suddenly, I felt it, something deep within me, stirring. A pulse of energy that wasn't my own. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper in the back of my mind. But then it grew louder, stronger, like a heartbeat hammering inside my chest. What? I staggered, clutching my head as the world around me seemed to shift. The air felt different, heavier, almost bending under the weight of something I couldn't quite grasp. Time itself seemed to slow, the edges of reality warping around me. It was now or never. I grasped at everything before me and peeled it away, uncovering the truth. The truth that I simply could not lose. The truth of my second gift. Chapter 266, Bishop Vale, 4. Jean Ashbluff wasn't fond of Arthur's plans. They were too elaborate, too dependent on precise timing and multiple moving parts. But that didn't change the fact that they worked. Usually. As he watched 3 Red Knot Guild members approach through the dimly lit corridor, Jean sighed. This part wasn't in the plan. Arthur hadn't accounted for the additional security on the east wing of the building. A minor oversight, but one that required improvisation. Ash Bluff, Jean murmured to himself, feeling the familiar chill of his gift stirring beneath his skin. Remember who you are. The guards spotted him, their postures shifting instantly from casual patrol to combat ready. The one in front, tall, muscular, wearing the silver and crimson uniform of Red Knot with practiced ease, pointed at Jean. "Intruder. Halt." Jean didn't halt. Instead, he slid one hand into his pocket and activated his calm link with a single tap. "Oversight in Sector 4, he said calmly, knowing Arthur would understand. Proceeding with alternative approach. The guards charged, mana flaring around them. Low silver rank. Insignificant. Jean didn't even bother drawing the ceremonial dagger at his hip. "You're trespassing on guild property," the lead guard growled, astral energy gathering around his fists. Jean tilted his head slightly. "Funny. I was thinking the same about you." His shadow rippled, then stretched, not following the laws of light and perspective, but extending with purpose, with hunger. The guards faltered, sensing something wrong but unable to identify the source of their sudden unease. Too late. From Jin's shadow rose 3 specters, translucent figures formed of darkness and malice. They moved with unnatural speed, each targeting a guard with unhesitating precision. The lead guard managed a half-formed shield of astral energy before the first specter reached him. For a moment, the barrier held, then shattered as the specter passed through it like smoke through a screen. The man screamed, dropping to his knees as the spectral entity invaded his shadow, corrupting it from within. The other 2 fared no better. One tried to flee, making it 3 steps before his own shadow rose up and wrapped around his legs, dragging him down to the floor. The third attempted an offensive spell, gathering red-tinged mana between his palms, only for the energy to sputter and die as Jin's specter touched him. In seconds, it was over. 3 bodies lay unconscious on the floor. Jin's comm link buzzed. Status? Callie's voice, tense but controlled. Proceeding to checkpoint 3, Jin replied, turning left at the next junction. Minor resistance. Nothing significant. More cultists in red knot uniforms, exactly where Arthur predicted. Arthur's engaged the bishop, she said, the words tight. Carries down. Jin's steps faltered momentarily. That wasn't part of the plan. Carrie was supposed to distract the bishop and then team up on him with the Knight Captain of Redmond while Arthur secured Reka and retreated to safety. How bad? Unknown. But Arthur's fighting him alone. Jin cursed under his breath. Arthur had contingencies for almost everything, but a direct confrontation with Bishop Vale this early wasn't ideal. Even with Erebus and his tactical brilliance, Arthur was still outmatched by several tiers. Is he using Reka? The comm link crackled with interference before Callie's voice returned. Yes. But it won't be enough. We need the final piece. Jin nodded to himself, increasing his pace. The final piece. Of course. Jin hadn't questioned how Arthur knew Rachel was in Redmond City. Just as he hadn't questioned how Arthur knew which Red Knot members were actually cultists in disguise. Arthur simply knew things, gathering information through a network so discreet that even Jin, with all the resources of the Ash Bluff family, couldn't trace it. The remainder of his escape from the Red Knot building proved surprisingly straightforward. Arthur had mapped every exit, every patrol route, with obsessive precision. He'd even highlighted which Red Knot members were genuine and which were cult infiltrators. The emergency response teams moved exactly as Arthur had predicted, gathering in sectors far from Jin's escape path. 20 minutes later, Jin emerged into a narrow alleyway 6 blocks from the guild headquarters, his clothing changed, his presence concealed beneath a subtle glamour that discouraged casual observation. Now for the final part of Arthur's plan. The rendezvous point was a small cafe in Redmond's commercial district. Busy enough to blend in, quiet enough for a private conversation. Arthur had chosen it because of its position relative to Rachel's likely patrol route, a calculated intersection designed to seem coincidental. Jin arrived first, ordering a hideously sweet chocolate concoction that prompted the barista to raise a skeptical eyebrow. He took a seat by the window, positioning himself to be visible from the street while appearing casually engaged with his drink. Arthur's timing was immaculate, as always. Jin counted down silently in his head. 3, 2, 1. Rachel walked past the window. Her pace was unhurried, her eyes scanning the street with practiced vigilance. She wore the standard Mythos Academy field uniform. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, practical for the mission she was supposedly here to complete. Jin watched her pass, then deliberately knocked his spoon to the floor with a clatter that carried just enough to catch her attention. Rachel glanced inside, her eyes passing over him once, then returning with a flash of recognition. Perfect. Jin nodded slightly, an acknowledgement between acquaintances. Nothing urgent. Nothing suspicious. Just enough to draw her in. Rachel hesitated for only a moment before entering the cafe. Her movements were fluid, graceful, betraying the physical enhancements of her rank. She approached Jin's table, her expression politely curious but guarded. "Jean Ashbluff," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I didn't expect to see you in Redmond." Jean gestured to the seat across from him, which Rachel took after a moment's consideration. "A coincidence," Jean lied smoothly. "I'm here on a mission." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. Jean could see the calculations behind them, the assessment of probabilities. She didn't believe in coincidences any more than Arthur did. "A mission," she repeated. "In a city where Arthur happens to have his mission." Jean sipped his drink, letting the silence stretch just long enough to be uncomfortable. Arthur had choreographed this conversation in advance, explaining exactly how to guide Rachel to the desired conclusion without appearing manipulative. "Arthur," Jean finally said, as if the name had just reminded him of something. "You two are still not speaking?" Rachel's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "That's not your concern." "Perhaps not," Jean agreed. He set his drink down, meeting her gaze directly. "Though it might interest you to know that he's currently at the Red Knot Guild headquarters." "I'm aware of his assignment." "Fighting a bishop. Alone." The change in Rachel was immediate and dramatic. Her mana density spiked so suddenly that the air around her shimmered with suppressed energy. Several patrons nearby glanced over, sensing the disturbance without understanding its source. "What did you say?" Her voice had dropped to a whisper, but there was nothing soft about it. Jean leaned forward. "The Red Knot Guild has been infiltrated by a cult. Their guild master is Bishop Vale himself. Arthur confronted him directly to save a girl named Reka. He's outmatched, even with Erebus." "Arthur knew you'd be in the city," Jean continued, ignoring her objection. "He didn't ask for your help directly because he's an arrogant, stubborn fool," Rachel finished, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. A hairline fracture appeared in the wood beneath her grip. Jean nodded. "He won't survive without assistance. Specifically, without your gift. And the Knight Captain." Rachel stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Jean thought she might simply walk away, the one reaction Arthur hadn't predicted. But then she looked down at him, and Jean felt a chill that had nothing to do with his own necromantic abilities. Her gift was activating even as she stood there, responding to emotions too powerful to contain. "Rachel," Jean called after her, following the script Arthur had provided. "He didn't ask because he didn't want to endanger you." She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. "I know exactly why he didn't ask." Jean remained seated, taking another sip of his drink. Everything was proceeding according to Arthur's design. The players were moving into their final positions. The trap was nearly complete. Yet Jean couldn't shake the memory of Rachel's eyes in that last moment, the absolute, terrifying focus in them, the promise of something that even Arthur might not have fully calculated. For the first time since joining Arthur's schemes, Jean felt a sliver of doubt. Because those sapphire eyes sparkled with something too twisted. Chapter 267, Bishop Vale, 5. Gifts were rare. So rare that those born with them were practically fated to break past the wall, that invisible boundary where most warriors, no matter how talented, found themselves stranded. Less than 1 in 100,000 possessed the spark of a gift, and even fewer managed to ignite it properly. But not all gifts were equal. Some, like the legendary Inyang body, stood at the pinnacle, one of the 4 greatest gifts in all of recorded history. A power that could rewrite reality itself, bending the laws of existence to its wielder's will. Others, while still formidable, simply didn't compare, footnotes in the grand tapestry of power that defined this world's hierarchy. Mine, Lucent Harmony, was powerful. A gift born from Luna's will, surpassing even Ian's dragon will, which had been diluted by the simple fact that Tiamat had split her power among 3. It was strong. It was enough. Or so I had thought. Then came the realization that clawed at the back of my mind, refusing to be ignored, digging deeper with each confrontation, each near-death experience. The strongest figures in this world, Lucifer Windward and Jack Blaze Spout, the protagonist and the antagonist, had two gifts. And that was terrifying. The gap between one gift and two wasn't linear. It was exponential, a chasm that seemed impossible to bridge through conventional means. Jack's second gift had come from the heavenly demon's intervention. A twist of fate, a cruel handout from something far beyond mortal understanding. Lucifer? Well, he was the protagonist. Of course he had two. The universe itself bent over backward for him, rearranging probabilities, manufacturing coincidences, all to ensure his ascension. Even Julius Slatemark, the first emperor, one of the most legendary figures in history, had he possessed two gifts as well? The uncertainty gnawed at me, a persistent ache that never quite subsided. The historical records were unclear, contradictory, as if the truth itself couldn't bear to be pinned down. Could I gain a second gift? Or was I doomed to be a step behind them forever? That thought haunted me. It shadowed my victories, tainted my achievements, whispered doubt into every moment of triumph. And then, reality decided to shatter my expectations. Because right now, in this moment, I had a second gift. Soul resonance. It was absurd. A power beyond overpowered. The kind of ability that shouldn't exist in a world even remotely concerned with balance. The kind of gift that would have scholars and powermongers alike foaming at the mouth if they knew of its existence. I could sync with the souls of those around me, borrowing their abilities, even storing one of their techniques as my own. I wouldn't be able to perfectly copy it, not unless I reached their level of mastery, but that didn't matter. The sheer utility of this ability was staggering, its potential limited only by the strength of those around me. And right now? I was about to put it to use. The bishop loomed before me, his blood magic saturating the air, weighing it down with the stench of copper and decay. His face was a mask of cruel amusement, like a child watching an insect struggle in a spider's web. He knew the gap between us. He knew I was running on borrowed time, that Rekka's gift was already beginning to fade, the black symbols on my skin dimming, dissolving. Without hesitation, I activated soul resonance. The strongest soul in the vicinity, no surprise, was Luna. Even sealed, even diminished, she was still something beyond mortal comprehension. A god in chains was still a god. Our souls were bound, intrinsically linked by covenant and circumstance. I reached out to her, tapping into the dormant power that still crackled beneath the surface, waiting to be unleashed. And it worked. A surge of raw, unfiltered energy flooded through me, crashing against the confines of my mortal form like a tsunami against a sandcastle. My vision blurred, reality fragmenting into shards of perception that refused to align properly. Power. Her power. Luna was a Qilin, a mythical beast that walked between storms and moonlight, a force of nature barely contained in flesh. The sheer number of abilities available to me was overwhelming, a torrent of possibilities that threatened to drown my consciousness. But there was no hesitation. The choice was obvious. Qilinification. It was similar to draconification, how those bonded with dragons could take on draconic traits, harden their skin into scales, reshape their hearts to pump fire through their veins. But Qilinification wasn't just a transformation. It was an ascension, a step towards something transcendent, a glimpse of what it meant to exist beyond the mundane. And of course, it had many abilities. For now, I focused on the two abilities that mattered. Soul vision. The world opened to me. My vision sharpened, not just physically, but spiritually. I could see the flow of mana, not as vague impressions, but as tangible currents, threads of power weaving through reality. Every movement, every shift in the battlefield became predictable. I could see the intention before the action, the gathering of power before its release. Paired with Seraphim's embrace, my perception soared to something terrifying, something that shouldn't be possible for someone of my rank. The bishop's blood magic was no longer just crimson energy, it was a living tapestry of malice, each tendril pulsing with purpose, with history, with the stolen vitality of countless sacrifices. I could see the weaknesses in his technique, the split-second gaps between one movement and the next. Mythic body. Power surged through my muscles, my bones, my very essence. Strength. Speed. Endurance. Everything multiplied. My human limits stretched, cracking apart as something greater took their place. My body didn't just enhance, it changed, a step toward the true form of a Qilin. My skin hardened, not into scales but into something more subtle, more refined, a shimmering barrier that deflected both physical blows and magical assault. My muscles densified, fibers rearranging themselves into configurations that defied conventional anatomy. Of course, closer was a relative term. Compared to a real Qilin, I was still pathetic. A human taking their first steps in a storm while Luna had long since become the tempest itself. A candle flickering beside the sun. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. Because help would come soon. I moved. The bishop's eyes widened fractionally, the first genuine surprise I'd managed to elicit from him. I was no longer just fast, I was a blur, a distortion in space that his eyes struggled to track. My sword, still cracked from our earlier exchange, hummed with renewed energy, pure light flaring along its length, mingling with the silvery glow of Qilin essence. I struck not at his center, where his defense was strongest, but at the periphery, the outer edge of his mana field, where blood magic thinned to conserve energy. My blade sliced through the barrier, drawing a shallow line across his forearm. First blood. The bishop hissed, more in surprise than pain, his composure slipping for a fleeting moment. Impossible, he murmured, his gaze reassessing me. What are you? I didn't waste breath on a response. Instead, I pressed the advantage, my body flowing from one strike to the next in a continuous sequence of motion. Each attack targeted a different angle, a different approach, never allowing him to settle into a defensive rhythm. High slash to the neck, feint to the left, twist into a low sweep at the legs, then up again in a diagonal cut aimed at the junction of shoulder and torso. I moved like water, like wind, my form incorporeal yet devastating. But the bishop wasn't an ascendant ranker for nothing. His recovery was instantaneous, his blood magic surging to compensate for the new threat I posed. His staff blurred, intercepting each of my strikes with precision that defied mortal limits. Where my blade found purchase, his blood magic flowed, sealing wounds even as they formed, regenerating damaged tissue in the span of heartbeats. Better, he acknowledged, a thin smile playing at the edges of his lips. But still insufficient. He counterattacked, and the world slowed. Chapter 268, Bishop Vale, 6. With soul vision and Seraphim's embrace, I could see every movement in excruciating detail. The way his staff twisted, leaving trails of crimson energy in its wake. The complex sigils he wove with his free hand, blood magic condensing into formations of staggering complexity. The shift in his stance, weight transferring from back foot to front in a motion too fluid to be entirely human. I saw it all. But seeing wasn't enough. I parried the first strike, barely, my sword screaming in protest as cracks spread further along its length. The second blow I dodged, contorting my body in ways that should have been impossible, the edge of his staff missing my throat by millimeters. The third hit home. A spike of crystallized blood, conjured from thin air, pierced my shoulder, driving through muscle and bone with horrific ease. Pain exploded across my senses, white-hot and all-consuming. I staggered, blood flooding my mouth as the spike's magic spread through my system, attempting to corrupt my very essence. I ripped myself away, tearing tissue in the process, but better that than allowing his magic to take root within me. The wound bled profusely, a steady stream of crimson staining the already ruined floor. The bishop pressed forward, sensing weakness, his attacks increasing in both speed and ferocity. I was on the defensive now, retreating step by step, each movement more desperate than the last. His blood magic filled the air, a storm of crimson death that left no avenue of escape. And beneath it all, a deeper pain was building. The borrowed power from Reika's gift was fading rapidly now, the black symbols on my skin dissolving one by one, returning to their rightful owner. With each symbol that vanished, a wave of agony crashed through me, as if my very cells were being torn apart and reassembled incorrectly. Worse, soul resonance and kilinification were exacting their own price. My human form wasn't meant to channel such power, wasn't built to sustain the kind of energy that coursed through my veins. Blood vessels ruptured beneath my skin, creating a patchwork of bruises across my body. My vision blurred, reality fracturing around the edges as my consciousness struggled to remain intact. I was burning from the inside out, consumed by the very power I had called upon. The bishop saw it. Of course he did. His eyes gleamed with the recognition of inevitable victory, with the satisfaction of a predator watching its prey weaken with each passing moment. "Your body is failing," he observed, his voice almost gentle, as if speaking to a terminally ill patient. "No human could sustain what you're attempting. The girl's gift, this other power you've manifested. They're tearing you apart." He wasn't wrong. I could feel it, the dissonance between mortal flesh and immortal power, the fundamental incompatibility that threatened to unravel my existence. Reika's gift had been dangerous enough on its own. Adding soul resonance and kilinification on top of that? It was suicide by another name. But I had no choice. I lunged forward, ignoring the protest of shredded muscles and cracking bones, pouring every ounce of remaining strength into one final, desperate attack. My sword, now barely holding together, blazed with the last of my pure light, a dying star that refused to go gently. The bishop sidestepped my strike with insulting ease, his staff spinning to intercept my blade. The impact shattered my sword completely, fragments of steel scattering across the floor like fallen stars. The force of the blow sent me stumbling backward, defenseless, exhausted. I collapsed to one knee, blood dripping from a dozen wounds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The room spun around me, reality becoming increasingly difficult to grasp as my body rebelled against the abuse it had endured. "A valiant effort," the bishop said, approaching slowly, his staff tapping against the ground with each step. "Truly impressive for one so young. But this is the inevitable outcome when you challenge powers beyond your comprehension." He raised his staff, blood magic gathering at its tip, a sphere of condensed malice that promised oblivion. "Perhaps in another life, you might have grown to become a worthy adversary. A shame we'll never know." I couldn't move. Couldn't dodge. Couldn't even raise my arms in a futile attempt at defense. My body had reached its absolute limit, punished beyond endurance by the conflicting forces I had channeled. So this was how it ended. Not with victory, but with the harsh lesson that determination alone wasn't enough, that some gaps couldn't be bridged through sheer will. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. But then, a surge of power. Not from within, but from without. A presence that hit my senses like a physical blow, a pressure that made even the bishop falter, his attack hesitating mid-formation. The air changed. There was no other way to describe it. The atmosphere itself seemed to lighten, as if some fundamental aspect of reality had been adjusted, recalibrated to accommodate something greater. The bishop turned sharply, eyes widening in genuine alarm. "What?" A blade of pure light pierced the doors, melting through solid metal as if it were nothing more than mist. The doors exploded inward, reduced to molten slag that scattered across the floor, hissing as it cooled. Two figures stepped through the ruined entrance. The first was a man in his early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, with the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His armor gleamed white and gold, the insignia of Redmond City's Night Division emblazoned across the breastplate. His mantle was a controlled inferno, dense and disciplined, the mark of an ascendant ranker who had earned his station through merit rather than politics. Knight Captain Valen Thornwright. But it was the second figure that drew my attention, that made my heart stutter in my chest. Rachel stood beside the Knight Captain, her honey blonde hair loose around her shoulders, her uniform torn and singed as if she had fought her way here. Her eyes, normally warm, normally gentle, blazed with an inner light that transcended mere rage. This was something deeper, something primal. The fury of someone who had found what was theirs threatened. "You," the bishop hissed, his composure finally cracking. "The Knight Captain. And a mere student?" Valen Thornwright didn't bother with a response. His sword, a simple, unadorned blade that nonetheless radiated power, rose in a formal salute. Bishop Vale, he stated, his voice carrying the weight of authority, of judgment. By the authority vested in me by the Imperial Court and the city of Redmond, you are hereby charged with treason, conspiracy, and crimes against humanity. The bishop's laugh was hollow, brittle. You think you can simply arrest me? I am beyond your jurisdiction, beyond your comprehension. I'm not here to arrest you, Thornwright replied calmly. I'm here to execute you. The two ascendant rankers moved simultaneously, their clash creating a shockwave that rattled the very foundations of the building. Blood magic met holy light, darkness against illumination, in a contest of wills that transcended mere physical combat. But Rachel didn't join the battle. Instead, she ran to me, her steps urgent, her eyes wide with a mixture of fury and fear. She dropped to her knees beside me, heedless of the blood that soaked the floor, that stained her uniform. Arthur, you idiot, she whispered, her voice cracking. You absolute, unbelievable idiot. Before I could respond, not that I had the strength to, her arms were around me, pulling me close in an embrace that felt like salvation itself. Her warmth enveloped me, a stark contrast to the cold that had been seeping into my bones, the chill of approaching death. I felt it then, her gift activating. Whereas Reka's gift had been pain and transformation, Rachel's was healing and restoration. Golden light flowed from her hands, from her heart, washing over me in waves of gentle radiance. Wounds began to close, torn muscles knitting themselves back together, fractured bones realigning. But more than that, her gift purified, cleansed. The corrupting influence of the bishop's blood magic, the strain of channeling Qilin power through a human vessel, the damage from Reka's gift. All of it, gradually washed away by Rachel's power. Why didn't you call me, she demanded, her face pressed against my shoulder. I could feel her tears, hot against my skin. Why do you always do this? Try to carry everything alone? I wanted to answer. Wanted to explain. But the words wouldn't come, trapped beneath the overwhelming relief of her presence, of her touch. In the background, the battle between Thornwright and Vale continued, their powers clashing in spectacular displays of light and shadow. But here, in this moment, there was only Rachel, her gift, and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against mine. Help had arrived. And for once, I allowed myself to be saved. Chapter 269, Rachel Creighton, 1. I watched the man in front of me, my hands glowing with soft, golden light as I healed his wounds. Arthur lay still, his breath steady but heavy, his body recovering from the absurd levels of power he had just forced himself to wield. The injuries were deep, layered with exhaustion that went beyond the physical. I pursed my lips. Then I asked. Did you predict this? Arthur's eyes widened slightly. He looked at me, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. I knew him too well. When the Baron told me the Knight Captain was busy, I knew you were here, he finally said, voice rough but calm. So I had to adjust my plans accordingly. I frowned. Why didn't you just call me? My voice was sharper than I intended. Why didn't you tell me before going up against a bishop? Arthur exhaled, closing his eyes briefly. Then he looked at me again, and there was something raw, something achingly real in his gaze. I need to be stronger, Rachel, he murmured. His fingers twitched, as if reaching for me, but stopping just short. I love you, he said simply. I want to protect you. With my own strength. Something in me broke. Tears pricked at my eyes before I even realized what was happening. A sharp, overwhelming swell of emotion surged through me, and I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to keep healing him even as my vision blurred. I wasn't stupid. I knew how Arthur thought. I knew his mind worked in ways most people couldn't even begin to follow. But hearing those words, hearing him say them, it made me hurt. Because I loved him too. So much it terrified me. And he kept doing this. Risking himself. Throwing himself into the jaws of people who would tear him apart without a second thought. Carrying the weight of everything, always thinking he had to be the one to take the fall. Tears slipped down my cheeks. I sniffled, blinking rapidly, trying to focus, trying to keep the light steady in my hands. That was when I noticed it. The black ink laced across his skin. Dark letters curled over his forearms, his wrists, pulsing, alive, unnatural. My hands hovered over them, my magic flickering slightly. "What is this?" I asked, wiping my face and focusing on the wrongness sinking into his body. Arthur let out a breath. "Reika's gift." I froze. My brow furrowed, my hands pausing. Reika. A girl. I stared at him, my hands still hovering over his arms. "A girl gave you this power?" I said slowly, tilting my head. Arthur blinked. Wait, that's not. I smiled. Then I reached into my spatial ring and pulled out a pair of enchanted cuffs. Before he could react, I grabbed his wrists and snapped them on. Arthur blinked at me again, confused. "Rachel?" "I'm capturing you now," I said sweetly, tightening the cuffs with a satisfied click. Arthur opened his mouth, probably to argue. Then something shifted. The black ink on his skin shuddered. And then, it began to fade. Arthur froze. The power he had stolen, the strength he had borrowed, it was vanishing. His breathing hitched. His body jerked slightly as something tore itself away from him. I watched as his limbs trembled, as his muscles strained, as the sheer recoil of his actions finally hit him. And I smiled wider. "See?" I said, brushing my hair back. "I told you not to overdo it." "You're enjoying this?" Arthur muttered weakly as his body gave out, collapsing against me. I let out a soft hum, patting his head like he was some overworked idiot who had finally realized just how mortal he actually was. "You won't die with me around," I whispered, my hands glowing as I poured healing magic into him. My brows furrowed, the warmth of my spell doing little to ease the knot of worry tightening in my chest. Because as much as I liked holding him like this, his weight pressing against me, the warmth of his breath on my shoulder, his injuries were bad. Not just bad. Dangerous. He had pushed himself too far. No, not too far, he had demolished the limit, trampled over it, and then had the audacity to keep going. "Arthur," I said, my voice dropping to something sharper, "you cannot do this again. Ever." He didn't respond. Because he knew. Because if he did this again, if he pushed himself to this extent one more time, he could actually die. And I wasn't letting that happen. I tightened my grip on him. "TCH." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Luckily, you're still not that strong. Yet." He would be. I knew he would be. And when that day came, when his power reached a point where no one could stop him, I would have to capture him before that. But right now, he was still mine to keep in check. I rubbed my ring, summoning a set of potions into my hand. The highest grade, the kind that could restore someone from the brink of death. "Open up," I ordered, uncorking one. Arthur made a vague, uncooperative sound. "Ugh, seriously?" His body had zero strength left, so I had to tilt his head, carefully pressing the vial to his lips and making sure he actually drank it. One potion. Then another. Then another, each one working its way through his broken body as my magic continued to mend the worst of the damage. Finally, after what felt like forever, I let out a slow breath. His health had stabilized. I rested my forehead against his, closing my eyes for a moment. Idiot. But at least he was my idiot. I turned my gaze to the violet-haired girl approaching, and the moment my eyes landed on her, she flinched. Good. I narrowed my eyes. She looked exhausted, worn down, unsteady on her feet. Recoil. Of course. Arthur hadn't been the only one to push himself past reason. I sighed and reached into my ring, pulling out another potion. With a flick of my wrist, I tossed it to her. "Here," I said. "Drink it. You took some recoil, didn't you?" She caught it, nodding slightly before uncorking it and drinking. I barely paid her any more attention, shifting my focus back to the man slumped against me, his head resting against my chest. "Arthur." I traced my fingers through his hair absent-mindedly, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. His body had finally stopped trembling, his mana stabilizing under my constant healing. I leaned down and pressed a soft kiss against his forehead. "Arthur," I murmured, my lips curling into a slow smile. "Now, what type of house should I build for us?" Arthur made a tired noise, barely lifting his head. "Ratch. I'm drowsy." I pulled him closer. "Shoo, it's all right. I'm here." He didn't argue. He didn't push me away. For the first time, Arthur Nightingale, cunning, untouchable, infuriating Arthur, was completely defenseless. And trusting. I wasn't letting go of this. The sounds of battle still rumbled in the distance. The clash of steel, the sharp pulses of astral energy. The Knight Captain and the Bishop were still locked in combat, though the tempo had slowed. I glanced toward the fight, assessing. The Bishop was stronger, no doubt about that, but he wasn't at full strength. He had spent too much fighting Arthur. My fingers absent-mindedly traced over Arthur's wrist, feeling the faint pulse beneath the skin. Arthur couldn't have done this much damage on his own. I frowned slightly. Did he fight Carrie too? The other ascendant ranker in this city. That would explain a lot. I exhaled slowly, stroking Arthur's hair as he drifted further into unconsciousness. "Idiot," I whispered. But my arms tightened around him all the same. Even though he was an idiot who put himself in danger, I was the bigger idiot who loved him. Chapter 270, Rachel Creighton, 2. I woke up to warmth. Not the harsh, burning kind of warmth that came from battle or overexertion, but something softer. Plush blankets, gentle lighting, the faintest scent of lavender lingering in the air. The mattress beneath me was almost too comfortable, like sinking into clouds, and for a brief moment, my mind refused to function beyond acknowledging the simple fact that I was here, wherever here was. My body felt heavy. Tired in a way that didn't just come from lack of rest but from complete depletion. Every muscle ached with that deep, stubborn exhaustion that refused to fade, the kind that made even the thought of movement seem like an impossible task. I exhaled slowly, blinking up at the ceiling. White. Ornate. Familiar, yet not. I turned my head slightly, taking in my surroundings. A large, well-furnished bedroom. The lighting was soft, golden. Heavy curtains blocked out the windows, but I could tell it was morning. Something felt off. I shifted, attempting to sit up, only to feel a sharp resistance. Clink. I froze. Slowly, I looked down. My wrists. Cuffed. Thick, enchanted cuffs bound my hands together, the faint glow of a suppression rune humming against my skin. I stared at them for a long moment, my mind taking an extra second to process why I was bound like some criminal before I realized. Someone was next to me. Curled up at my side, completely dead to the world, was Rachel. Her golden hair spilled across the pillow, one hand lightly gripping my sleeve, her expression softer in sleep than I had ever seen it. She was still in her usual clothes, though slightly wrinkled, as if she had been here far longer than she was supposed to be. For a moment, I simply looked at her. Then, I shifted slightly. Big mistake. The moment I moved, she stirred, her brows furrowing, her fingers tightening around my sleeve as if she knew I was trying to escape. Then, in the space of a breath, her eyes snapped open. I barely had time to register the shock flashing across her face before she lunged, throwing her arms around me in a hug so tight it knocked the air from my lungs. "Arthur." I stiffened, caught completely off guard. She buried her face against my shoulder, gripping me like I might disappear if she let go. You idiot, you absolute. Do you have any idea? I blinked. Rachel? Her grip tightened. You were in a coma for a month. I froze. What? I managed to calm her down, no small feat, considering she was clinging to me like a drowning woman to driftwood. Despite the awkwardness of the cuffs restricting my movement, I somehow managed to pat her head. It wasn't easy, but after some grumbling, mostly from her, Rachel finally took a deep breath, pulling herself together enough to explain everything. The bishop had escaped. Not just that, the cult behind the Red Knot Guild hadn't been exposed. Which meant the Red Chalice cult wasn't found. I clenched my fists, a slow, simmering frustration building inside me. I had wanted proof. Cold, undeniable evidence that would expose their existence. But I had failed. I took a breath, pushing down the frustration. There would be time to dwell on it later. What about Reka? I asked. Is she? Rachel's sapphire eyes narrowed. And then I was suddenly on my back again, Rachel straddling me, her hands firmly planted on my chest. I blinked. She tilted her head, her lips curling into something that looked like a smile, but her eyes were most definitely not smiling. The first thing you ask about, other than your mission, is Reka, she murmured. I paused. Well, I was just worried. No. We stared at each other. A long, charged silence. And what, I said slowly, testing the cuffs again, are these? Rachel blushed. And then, to my growing horror, she twirled her hair. I narrowed my eyes. Stop acting coy. She looked away, suddenly very interested in the ceiling. I captured you. I stared. What am I, a certain pocket monster? I missed you so much. Rachel suddenly threw herself onto me, burying her face into my neck. And I saved you, so I deserve a reward. I stared at the ceiling, vaguely wondering if I was still in a coma. What the hell? Then, in the back of my mind, I heard her. You finally woke up, Luna's voice murmured. Luna, I said, a little desperately, do you have any idea what's going on? Of course. Oh, thank God. Explain, then. Never in my immortal life, Luna interrupted, have I seen something like this. Arthur. What in the stars did you do to the future saintess of the world? I didn't do anything, I protested. Shut up, Luna growled in my mind, her usually serene voice dripping with absolute betrayal. I can't believe this, to see the most beautiful soul in the world corrupted like this. If there was a God worth praying to, I would be on my knees right now. I closed my eyes, inhaling. Maybe if I opened them again, reality would have fixed itself. I tried. It didn't. Instead, I found Rachel leaning in, too close. Her sapphire eyes shimmered with something far too amused for my comfort. Do you not like them? She asked, tilting her head. Of course not. Take them off. She pouted. It was cute. Objectively. But unfortunately for her, I had built up a resistance to this kind of nonsense. With a sigh that sounded way too exaggerated for someone who had just illegally detained me, she uncuffed my wrists. I flexed my hands, finally free, exhaling as the weight of the suppression runes faded. Sorry, Rachel murmured. I blinked. She wasn't pouting now. There was no teasing lilt to her voice, no playful smirk. She looked, almost guilty. I'm sorry, she repeated, softer this time. So don't hate me, okay? I stared at her for a moment. I couldn't hate you for this, I said honestly. Rachel froze. Then, in the blink of an eye, her mood flipped back to pure joy. Her entire face lit up, eyes gleaming like I had just handed her the moon on a silver platter. Ah. Then I need to say sorry properly, she stammered. I barely had time to process what that meant before she straightened, cleared her throat, and proudly announced. You can touch me. A pause. A long, dangerous pause. She pointed just below her chin, tapping her skin lightly. Here. No. Why? She whined, throwing her hands up like I had just denied her a once-in-a-lifetime wish. I mean, you like me. And isn't it desirable? I sighed, placing my hands firmly on her shoulders. Rachel, I said, looking her straight in the eyes, I like you the same way I like the 3 other girls. But there's an order to this. Her pout deepened. Am I not first? Not that kind of order, I muttered, rubbing my temples. Luna let out something between a strangled sigh and a groan of absolute despair. This is it, Luna muttered, voice dripping with weary resignation. This is how my faith in humanity dies. How about we go back to that plan of seducing every powerful woman? Luna. Think about it, she continued, completely ignoring me. You even managed to turn a saintess into, what do you call it? Ah. Yandere. I'm sure normal girls would be even easier to corrupt. You are so not helpful. Meanwhile, in the real world, Rachel was still sitting in my lap, fidgeting. And that was dangerous. Not because she looked shy, no, that wasn't the issue. The issue was that I knew her, and Rachel Creighton wasn't the type to fidget. If she was acting nervous, it was either a prelude to something ridiculous, or she was about to drop information that would make my life significantly worse. Arthur, she murmured, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her dress, I just want you so badly. But I don't want to annoy you. I opened my mouth. Closed it. Thought about saying something rational. Decided against it. She pressed on. I'm sorry for cuffing you. I squinted at her. I'm sorry for keeping you in the Creighton estate for a month. I blinked. A month? Anne. She hesitated, glancing away, only allowing your family to visit you. My brain stalled. What? What about others? Rachel twiddled her fingers, suddenly very interested in the embroidery on her sleeve. Well. She started, drawing out the word like she was about to admit to accidentally breaking a vase, not imprisoning me for an entire month. They tried to visit, she muttered. There was a beat of silence. I exhaled sharply, rubbing my temple with my now uncuffed hands. Rachel, I said slowly, what exactly did you do? She still refused to meet my eyes. I groaned. Chapter 271, Rachel Creighton, 3. I looked at Rachel and analyzed her. Her personality was currently a bit broken. By broken I meant way not like usual. She was usually composed, intelligent and saintly. The Rachel I knew carried herself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Her words were measured, her actions deliberate, her compassion genuine but never overwhelming. She had always been the steady one, the voice of reason when everything else descended into chaos. Not like this. This Rachel, fidgeting, emotional, desperate for validation, was almost a stranger wearing a familiar face. The dissonance was jarring, like hearing a beloved song played in the wrong key. What happened? I wondered. She needs validation from you, Luna said, her voice unusually solemn. For some reason, her proof of originality is revolving around you and you alone. I frowned, studying Rachel's face more carefully. Beneath the veneer of childish possessiveness, I could see something darker, a shadow of fear that didn't belong there. Her eyes, normally clear and steady, held a feverish desperation that made my chest tighten uncomfortably. Rachel, I began, choosing my words with care, when exactly did I fall into a coma? She blinked, momentarily caught off guard by the question. Right after the battle with Bishop Vale. You collapsed as soon as I started healing you. And you've been here the entire time? Something flashed across her expression, guilt, perhaps, or defensiveness. Someone had to make sure you were safe. For an entire month? I pressed, not unkindly. Rachel's fingers twisted in the fabric of her dress, her knuckles whitening. The bishop is still out there, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. And the cult. They might have tried to finish what they started. There was more to it than that, I could tell from the way she wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Rachel wasn't just protecting me from external threats. She was guarding against something else entirely. Rachel, I said softly, what aren't you telling me? The silence stretched between us, taut and fragile. Outside, rain began to patter against the windows, a gentle rhythm that only emphasized the tension in the room. Finally, she exhaled, a shaky breath that seemed to deflate her. You almost died, she whispered. Not just injured, not just unconscious. You were dying, Arthur. Her voice cracked on my name, and I saw the first glimmer of tears in her eyes. Your body was rejecting itself. Whatever you did during that battle, using Rekha's gift, pushing yourself beyond your limits, it tore you apart from the inside. Your mana channels were shredded, your organs failing one by one. She looked up at me then, and the raw pain in her eyes hit me like a physical blow. I healed you, she continued, her voice steadying slightly. I poured everything I had into keeping you alive. But it wasn't enough. You wouldn't wake up, and I couldn't figure out why. She swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. The royal physicians said there was nothing more to be done. That you might never wake up. That your mind had retreated too far to be reached. Understanding began to dawn, a cold realization that sank into my bones. So you stayed, I murmured. Rachel nodded, a tear finally escaping to trace a silver path down her cheek. I stayed. I channel my gift into you every day, hour after hour, trying to reach whatever part of you was still fighting. I thought if I just tried hard enough, if I just loved you enough. She trailed off, her composure finally crumbling. Tears flowed freely now, her shoulders shaking with the force of emotions too long suppressed. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice barely audible. Every day that passed, it felt like I was losing more of you. And I couldn't. I couldn't bear the thought of a world without you in it. Something twisted in my chest, a complicated tangle of guilt, affection, and realization. This wasn't just about possessiveness or jealousy. This was about fear. Raw, primal fear of loss. I reached out, hesitating only briefly before placing my hand over hers. Rachel, I said quietly, look at me. She raised her head, tears still streaming down her face, her usual composure nowhere to be found. I'm here, I told her. I'm awake. Whatever you did, it worked. You're exhausted, I said, not a question but a statement of fact. Physically, mentally, emotionally. You've been pouring your gift into me for weeks, with no rest, no reprieve. She nodded minutely, as if admitting weakness was still difficult despite everything. Her voice cracked again, fresh tears welling in her eyes. I can't lose you, Arthur. I just can't. Everyone else sees the prodigy, the strategist, the genius with limitless potential. But I see you. And the thought of a world without you in it is. It's unbearable. Something shifted inside me then, a quiet realization that had perhaps been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. I reached out, gently taking her face in my hands, my thumbs brushing away her tears. Rachel, I said softly, I'm not going anywhere. Her breath hitched, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. I can't promise I won't get hurt again, I continued, holding her gaze steadily. I can't promise that everything will be safe or easy. But I can promise you this, I want you in my life. Not just as a healer, not just as a friend. As someone essential to me. I could feel Luna's surprise rippling through our connection, but I ignored it, focusing solely on the woman before me. I've been a fool, I admitted. So focused on the big picture, on strategies and plans and long-term goals, that I never properly acknowledged what was right in front of me. What you mean to me? Rachel went very still, her tears suddenly frozen on her cheeks. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying that I care for you, Rachel. Deeply. I'm saying that when I look at my future, I can't imagine it without you there." It wasn't an empty declaration. The words came from a place of genuine realization, of pieces finally falling into place. Rachel had always been there, steady and unwavering. She had seen me at my worst and still chosen to stay, not because of what I could do, but because of who I was. "I need you," I said simply. "Not just your gift, not just your abilities. You. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength. The way you see the world, the way you face challenges. All of it." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but these were different, the release of tension rather than the grip of fear. "I've been so afraid," she admitted, her voice steadying slightly. "Watching you with Reka, with the princesses. I've been terrified that there wouldn't be room for me. That I'd be left behind." "Never," I said firmly. "You will always have a place with me, Rachel. Always." She drew in a shaky breath, then another, steadier one. Something in her eyes began to clear, the feverish desperation giving way to something more centered, more like the Rachel I knew. "I'm sorry," she said, a hint of her old composure returning. "For how I've been acting. For the restraints." A flash of embarrassment crossed her face. I don't know what came over me. Magical exhaustion, emotional trauma, and a month of keeping someone alive through sheer force of will, I suggested dryly. "I think you're entitled to a little irrationality." A small, tentative smile curved her lips, the first genuine one I'd seen since waking. Still. It wasn't like me. "No," I agreed. "But the core of it was very much you, Rachel. The devotion, the determination, the refusal to give up on someone you care about. Those are all quintessentially Rachel Creighton." She laughed softly, the sound a little watery but real. "You always see the best in me." "I see all of you," I corrected. "The good, the challenging, the complicated. And I value all of it." Her expression softened, some of the tension finally leaving her shoulders. She wasn't completely back to her usual self, there was still a wariness in her eyes, a lingering fear of loss, but the worst of the emotional storm had passed. She was still holding on to me, her grip perhaps a bit tighter than strictly necessary, but the frantic possessiveness had eased into something more measured, more sustainable. She would likely remain protective, perhaps always more afraid of losing me than was entirely reasonable, but the core of who she was, intelligent, compassionate, steady, was reasserting itself. Chapter 272, Second Mission Interlude, 1. The hall of the Red Chalice cult stretched impossibly deep into the mountain, a vast chamber carved from obsidian that seemed to devour light rather than merely exist within it. Crimson torches lined the blackened walls, their flames unnaturally still yet somehow casting shadows that writhed and twisted across the floor like sentient things. The air tasted of iron and ash, carrying whispers that slithered into the mind rather than the ear. At the center of this oppression sat Cardinal Akasha. He did not simply occupy the bloodstone throne, he commanded it, as though the massive seat had been formed from the very earth to cradle his power. His robes cascaded around him in folds of such deep crimson they appeared almost black until he moved, revealing their true color like fresh blood emerging from a wound. The air around him hummed with a frequency just below hearing, a vibration that made one's teeth ache and bones shiver. His fingers, each adorned with rings carved with symbols that seemed to shift when viewed directly, tapped a slow, deliberate rhythm against the armrest. Each impact sent imperceptible ripples through the astral fabric of the chamber. Before him, prostrated like a broken thing, knelt Bishop Vale. The bishop's robes, once symbols of his station and power, hung in tatters from his frame. Blood, his own, had dried in patterns across the fabric, telling the tale of his defeat more eloquently than words ever could. His forehead pressed against the cold stone floor, not daring to rise without permission. Even in his diminished state, power rolled off him in waves that would have brought ordinary men to their knees. Yet here, he was nothing. The silence in the hall deepened until it became a physical weight, pressing down on Vale's shoulders, squeezing the air from his lungs. No one moved. No one dared. Then, "Rise," Akasha murmured. The word barely disturbed the air, yet it filled the entire chamber, reverberating not in the ears but in the chest, in the marrow, in the soul. Bishop Vale straightened, his movements stiff from wounds not yet fully healed. His eyes remained downcast, fixed on a point just below the cardinal's chin. "Cardinal," he said, voice steady despite the shame that hung around him like a shroud. "I return in failure." A ripple moved through the shadows at the edges of the hall, resolving into figures that had been standing so still they seemed part of the architecture. Other bishops and priests materialized from the darkness, their eyes reflecting the torchlight like predators watching wounded prey. "A failure indeed," one of them said, voice dripping with contempt. "To lose not to another cult, nor to the empire, but to a boy." Laughter followed, soft yet cutting, each chuckle a blade slipping between ribs. Bishop Vale's jaw tightened, the only outward sign of his humiliation. Pride was a luxury afforded only to the victorious. But Cardinal Akasha did not join in their amusement. He remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed on Vale with an intensity that seemed to peel back flesh to examine the soul beneath. "Tell me," he said, each word measured and precise. "How did it happen?" The chamber fell silent once more. Even the shadows stopped their dance. Bishop Vale drew a breath that seemed to pain him. The corruption of Redmond was proceeding exactly as planned, he began, his voice taking on the cadence of formal report. "The city was falling under our control through the Red Knot Guild. We moved with meticulous care, ensuring our presence remained concealed even from the Knight Captain himself." His hands clenched at his sides, knuckles whitening. But then he appeared. Something changed in Akasha's posture, a subtle shift, almost imperceptible, yet the entire room responded to it. The air grew heavier, the shadows deeper, the silence more absolute. "Who?" The question hung in the air like a suspended blade. "Arthur Nightingale," Vale said, unable to keep the raw frustration from his voice now. "A boy of 16. Young, but possessing a mind that sees through deception as if it were glass. He is not merely strong, he is dangerous in ways that defy conventional understanding. He anticipated strategies that had taken me months to craft. He turned Vice Guild Master Carrie Milton against me, extracted Reka from our grasp, and..." He hesitated, shame threatening to choke his words. "And?" Akasha prompted, his voice deceptively gentle. "And he wounded me," Vale admitted. "Not just once, but repeatedly. He matched me even if I was injured, even if only for moments, with power that should be impossible for someone his age." The amusement from the other cult members evaporated like water on hot stone. Their expressions shifted from mockery to disbelief, then to something darker, concern. Cardinal Akasha remained motionless for several heartbeats, the only movement the steady tap of his ringed finger against the bloodstone. Then, with deliberate slowness, he leaned forward, the movement causing the shadows around his throne to stretch toward Vale like grasping hands. "Interesting," he murmured, the words somehow more terrifying than rage would have been. Vale swallowed against a dry throat. "He is not normal," he continued, compelled by that terrible interest to speak further. "His mind operates on a level that surpasses even our most experienced strategists. And he possesses abilities that," he faltered, then pushed on, "that should be beyond the reach of any mortal his age." A bishop with hollow cheeks and eyes like burning coals stepped from the shadows, his disbelief evident. "You ask us to believe you were outmaneuvered by a child?" Another figure emerged, this one's face half hidden behind a mask of crimson porcelain. "Perhaps the esteemed bishop simply wishes to elevate his opponent," the figure suggested, venom dripping from every syllable. "After all, how shameful to be defeated by a mere boy. How much more palatable if that boy were something extraordinary." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the hall, but died quickly as Akasha raised a single finger. The cardinal's lips curved into what might have been a smile on another face. On his, it was an expression that promised blood and screams. You believe, he said, each word falling into the silence like a stone into still water, that this Arthur Nightingale represents a genuine threat to our designs? Vale met Akasha's gaze directly for the first time, his resolve hardening despite the risk. Yes, Cardinal, he answered, with absolute certainty. I do. Akasha exhaled slowly, the sound like wind through a burial chamber. He leaned back, seeming to sink deeper into his throne as he contemplated Vale's words. The shadows danced around him, agitated by unseen currents. A child, he mused, his voice taking on a strange, almost wistful quality. A mere boy who dismantled years of careful manipulation. Who tore apart an entire operation woven with such delicate precision. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the torch flames dared to crackle. Then, Akasha laughed. The sound was soft at first, almost intimate, like a lover's whisper against skin. It grew slowly, building not in volume but in depth, resonating through the chamber until the very stone seemed to vibrate in response. It was not the laughter of amusement, but of awakening, of a predator who has scented worthy prey after years of disappointment. How utterly, deliciously fascinating. His eyes gleamed with something that went beyond interest, beyond obsession, a hunger that had slept for centuries and now stirred, ravenous. Perhaps, he said, his voice now soft with what might have been mistaken for affection, it is time I see this prodigy for myself. The other cult members exchanged glances, unease rippling through their ranks like a contagion. Cardinal Akasha had not left this sanctum in over a decade. For him to consider doing so now. Vale's expression faltered. Cardinal, I did not mean to suggest. Of course you didn't, Akasha interrupted, his smile widening to reveal teeth too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. But some gifts arrive unwrapped, unexpected. He rose from his throne in one fluid motion, his robes flowing around him like liquid shadow. The air in the chamber grew so thick with power that several of the lesser priests staggered back, gasping for breath. Prepare the chalice, he commanded, his voice resonating with terrible purpose. I wish to see this Arthur Nightingale. The cult members bowed their heads in unison, not daring to question. In the flickering crimson light, Cardinal Akasha's shadow stretched across the obsidian floor, not in the shape of a man, but of something much older, much vaster, with too many limbs and a crown of horns that scraped the ceiling. His laughter still hung in the air, a promise of blood to come. Chapter 273, Second Mission Interlude, 2. After finally escaping Rachel's iron grip, both metaphorically and literally, I was able to meet my family. As much as I wanted to be annoyed at her for keeping me locked in the Creighton estate for a month, she had at least allowed them to visit while I was in a coma. So, small victories, I supposed. The moment I stepped into the sitting room, my mother was on me. Arthur. She moved fast, faster than I thought a woman in heels should be able to, and wrapped me in a hug that was only slightly suffocating. Her warmth was familiar, grounding, but also held that distinct motherly pressure that warned me she would be scolding me later. Behind her, my father stood with his arms crossed, giving me the look. The one that said, "You're lucky you're alive, but we will be having a conversation." And then there was Arya. My 1 year younger sister, who had inherited all the worst parts of being the youngest child and none of the restraint. She stood a few paces behind, watching the scene unfold, arms folded, eyes sharp. "So," she said, her voice sweet, too sweet, "I hear you decided to be reckless. Again." I sighed, already feeling a headache forming. "Arya, please." "No, no, I insist." She stepped forward, tilting her head. "You nearly died. Do you know what happens when normal people nearly die, Arthur?" I exhaled through my nose. "They try not to do it again." "Exactly." She waved a hand. "But you, dear brother, seem to be under the impression that death is just a minor inconvenience." "Arya," my father finally spoke, voice calm but firm. "Give your brother some time to breathe." Arya made a oomph sound but backed off slightly. Meanwhile, my mother was still gripping my arms like she was checking for structural damage. "Are you eating properly?" she asked. You look thinner. I was in a coma. Yes, and yet I know Rachel has a personal chef. Did they not make sure you were properly fed with nutrient infusions? Honestly, I should have supervised. I sighed. This was going to take a while. I talked to them, carefully weaving a version of the truth that wouldn't send my mother into another spiral of, why does my son keep fighting people who can kill him? According to my account, I had been unfortunately caught in the middle of a Redmond incident involving a cultist bishop. A terribly inconvenient and mildly traumatic experience, of course. Nothing to worry about. My mother, to no one's surprise, worried anyway. I can't believe it, she said, pressing a hand to her chest like I'd just admitted to something truly scandalous. A silver-ranked guild, corrupted, and you had to fight a bishop. Technically, I said, choosing my words carefully, I didn't go looking for a fight. And yet, Arya cut in, folding her arms, a fight somehow found you. I resisted the urge to sigh. Well, she wasn't wrong. Of course, the real truth was that if Carrie hadn't worn the bishop down, I wouldn't even be standing here right now. Even after pushing myself to the absolute limit, I had still barely managed to tip the scales. Eventually, after a long series of reassurances, careful dodging of certain details, and the occasional knowing glare from my father, I managed to finally calm them down. Then, I escaped back to my room. Rachel wasn't here, thank the stars, so I could actually think. I collapsed onto the bed, stretching out my limbs, staring at the ceiling. My body still ached, a dull, lingering exhaustion settling deep into my bones, but my mind was far too alive to sleep. Because, for all the things that had gone wrong, something had changed. I was close to reaching low integration rank. And, more importantly, I had 2 gifts. Same as Jack and Lucifer. That fact alone sent a strange thrill through me. Soul resonance. A soul aspect gift. The only one in existence. I frowned, tapping my fingers against the mattress. Luna. Yeah, it's weird, she agreed without hesitation. Soul aspect gifts weren't supposed to manifest the way mind and body aspect gifts did. They weren't direct, weren't something tangible you could just use. They were more of a balancing force between the two. Which made the fact that I had one, utterly ridiculous. And yet, it was powerful. The first ability allowed me to copy someone's attributes or powers, so long as they were physically close to me. The second ability let me store one of those copies for later, like a single-use ability waiting to be deployed. The first ability was already broken. With Luna's soul always near me, I could activate kilinification at will, tapping into her overwhelming power whenever I needed it. That alone gave me a massive boost in strength. And I could still keep an extra copy of something else on standby. The only drawback was that I couldn't use 2 different abilities at once. Not yet, anyway. Maybe that would change when I surpassed the wall and hit Ascendant rank. For now, though. I exhaled, closing my eyes. I had failed to expose the Red Chalice cult. They were still out there, hidden, waiting. But I had saved Reka. And, whether she fully accepted it yet or not, she was now a part of Ouroboros. Just as I was beginning to finally rest, my door swung open. I sighed. Rachel, please. Then I actually looked. And immediately sat up straight. King Alastair. I was suddenly, deeply awake. Your Majesty, I said, bowing instinctively as I took in the fierce look in his eyes. Alastair Creighton wasn't just any ruler. He was a Radiant rank powerhouse, a living legend, and a man who carried himself with the kind of authority that made the very air tense in his presence. And right now, he looked furious. Arthur Nightingale, he said, his voice like a sharpened blade. I entrusted you with my daughter's future. I trained you. I gave you the Archlich's skull. All so you could free Rachel from the fate of being shackled to the so-called hero when she did not want to be. I swallowed. Yes. But. His shoulders twitched. A muscle in his jaw ticked. I had exactly 1 second to react before his aura surged in. "How dare you take my daughter, you bastard!" I flinched, barely resisting the urge to throw myself off the bed. You, Alastor pointed an accusatory finger at me, looking like he was seconds away from setting the entire estate on fire. "Because of you, my SNTLY, innocent daughter used the 7-circle mage I stationed at Mythos Academy just to dance with you." I opened my mouth. Closed it. Tried very hard to figure out which part of that sentence I was supposed to respond to. But he wasn't done. "And then, Alastor actually looked pained as he continued, she brought you back here. And proceeded to sleep next to you every night. While cuffing you." His eye twitched. "Stop putting your kinks on my pure daughter." I choked. I raised my hands in surrender. "Excuse me, sir, it is not my fault." King Alastor was breathing fire. Not literally, though given his mana rank, I wouldn't have been surprised if he could. His presence filled the room, pressing down on me like a force of nature, his sheer disbelief and paternal outrage radiating off him like an active battlefield. Meanwhile, I sat there on the bed, hands still raised, desperately trying to figure out how my life had reached this point. "Your Majesty," I started carefully, choosing my words with the same delicacy one would use when handling a live grenade, I swear, this is not what it looks like." Alastor let out a slow, measured breath. Then he exploded again. "Not what it looks like." The entire room shook. "My daughter, my sweet, innocent, saintly daughter, came to my estate and kept you captive like some sort of deranged princess with a hostage? And you're telling me it's not what it looks like?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. You were cuffed to her bed for a month. I didn't ask for that. She refused to let the other girls visit you. I didn't know that either." Alastor pinched the bridge of his nose, taking a slow, suffering breath, as if he were trying to hold on to the last shreds of his sanity. "This," he said through gritted teeth, "is precisely what I feared when I sent her to that academy. Again, Your Majesty, I had zero part in this. I was unconscious." He leveled a stare at me that made me reconsider all my life choices. "So," he said slowly, "you mean to tell me that my devoted, reserved, angelic daughter just so happened to wake up one morning and spontaneously decided to keep you imprisoned here for a month? And that this had nothing to do with you?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Considered my odds of survival if I answered incorrectly. "Yes." Alastor dragged a hand down his face, exhaling like a man who had seen too much. Then, as if the universe itself was conspiring against me, the door creaked open. And Rachel peeked in. "Arthur," she sang, completely ignoring her father's looming fury, "do you want to have dinner together?" Alastor turned to look at her. Then turned back to look at me. Then turned back to look at her. His eye twitched so hard I thought he might ascend to another plane of rage entirely. "Rachel." Rachel blinked up at him innocently, clasping her hands behind her back. "Yes, father." "Explain." Rachel tilted her head. "Explain what?" Alastor slowly turned to me. "I will kill you." Chapter 274, Second Mission Interlude, 3. "Sorry about my father," Rachel sighed as we sat down for dinner together. It was just the two of us in one of the many, many dining halls in the Creighton estate. Because, of course, they had so many that using a different one every night for a month would still leave some untouched. "Don't worry about it," I said, offering her a small smile as I picked up my utensils. "Are you feeling better?" "Yeah," she murmured, placing a hand over her chest, fingers curling slightly against the fabric. "After the ball at Mythos Academy, I got really scared. And that just exacerbated things. My feelings for you became, dangerous, both for me and you." Her voice trailed off, her face turning a light shade of red as she scratched her cheek, but the smile on her lips was soft. Almost bashful. I watched her for a moment before responding. "Rachel, you don't have to worry," I said, setting my utensils down. I know you're not like that. Rachel shifted slightly. Then, very quietly, just above a whisper, she muttered, well, not entirely. My eyes narrowed. What do you mean by that? I asked. She refused to meet my gaze. Her cheeks turned an even deeper red, her fingers drumming against the table. Then, after a moment of clear internal struggle, she looked up and blurted out. Will you be imprisoned by me for the fall break? I blinked. And again. Tilted my head. Then, very deliberately, I took a bite of my food. I'm sorry, I said with a pleasant smile. I seem to have misheard you. Rachel, instead of showing the appropriate level of shame, grabbed my arm. I'm serious, she said, her grip firm, her eyes completely unrepentant. It was so much fun. Internally, I groaned. How the hell did Rachel turn into Cecilia all of a sudden? No, I said flatly, shaking my head. Rachel pouted. But, thankfully, she let go of my arm and returned to eating, though I could feel her sulking. I sighed. Something told me this wasn't the last time I was going to have this conversation. Wow, your harem is becoming more dangerous, Luna mused in my mind, her voice dripping with amusement. At this rate, they'll have you in an actual cage soon. God, shut up. I shuddered at the thought. The very unfortunate fan art came to mind, the one where Lucifer had been drawn locked in a golden cage, imprisoned by Cecilia, his expression a perfect mix of irritation and resignation. The readers of Saga of the Divine Swordsman had turned that into a running joke. And now, here I was, living it. She seems less obsessed now, though, Luna continued, ever the analyst. I think you need to show her just how bad it is to be cuffed. I blinked. What? Well, Luna said, as if explaining something completely obvious, she thinks it's nice because she's never thought about how you felt. So you should cuff her and let her experience it. I frowned. That actually makes sense. But are you tricking me? Why would I, she said, completely deadpan. After all, have I ever guided you wrong? I paused. Because, annoyingly, she hadn't. For all her sarcasm and endless commentary, Luna had never once led me astray. Fine. I made up my mind. Rachel and I finished our meal, and as she reached for her wine glass, twirling her hair absent-mindedly, I spoke. Rachel, come to my bedroom. Rachel froze. Then, slowly, she turned to look at me. Already, she stammered, her voice suddenly an octave higher. Her fingers tightened around her glass, her golden hair slipping through them. I mean, I wasn't ready, but I will do my best. I sighed. No, not for that. Rachel's shoulders slumped. She pouted, the energy of a woman deeply let down. Just follow me. She sighed dramatically but got up to follow. We stepped into the bedroom that had been generously provided for me, by which I meant the room Rachel had personally assigned, complete with far too much unnecessary luxury. Rachel turned to me, tilting her head slightly. So, she said, voice smooth, what do you want me to do? There was a lilt to her tone, bright, playful, yet carrying just enough weight to send a shiver down my spine. Despite the soft flush on her cheeks, her confidence never wavered. I looked away, rubbing the back of my neck. I'd gotten used to her flirtations, but damn, when she wanted to, she could shift her voice, energetic one moment, then soft, piercing, dangerously sensual the next. I refused to acknowledge the slight warmth creeping up my own face. Instead, I extended my hand. Hands, I said simply. Rachel blinked, but with the trust of someone who had absolutely no reason to trust me, she placed both of her hands on top of mine without hesitation. Her sapphire eyes shone, utterly unguarded. Golden retriever, I thought absently. And then I snapped the cuffs on her wrists. Rachel froze. Huh. Before she could react further, I gently, but firmly, pushed her onto the bed. Her eyes widened. Then. Oh, she hummed, her expression shifting dangerously fast. Do you like it like this? I immediately regretted my life choices. I heard some guys. No, I cut her off before she could continue that sentence, my brow twitching violently. Absolutely not. Rachel pouted. I took a deep breath, pinching the bridge of my nose before regaining my composure. You kept cuffing me without realizing how annoying it was, I said, folding my arms. Now, it's your turn. You get to experience exactly what it felt like for me. Rachel blinked. Then, to my complete surprise, she nodded. Oh, she said thoughtfully. That makes sense. I narrowed my eyes. That had been way too easy. Did you think I was going to resist? Rachel asked, smiling up at me. Yes, I admitted without hesitation. She giggled. I won't when it comes to you, dummy. Her voice was light, but there was weight behind it. Even if it's something I probably won't like, I'll still try it out because, it's you, Arthur. Her sapphire eyes softened, unwavering, utterly sincere. I like everything that comes from you. And the 3 other girls? They think the same. I exhaled, ignoring the dangerous implications of that statement as I moved closer. My fingers wrapped around her cuffed wrists, pushing them up above her head. Is it not annoying to have no control? I asked. Rachel hummed, tilting her head slightly. I leaned in, my face close to hers. I hate not being able to move. I hate being imprisoned. She blinked up at me, completely unbothered. I was supposed to be making a point here. But instead, I found myself distracted. Because damn it, she really was too beautiful. Rachel's lips parted slightly, her gaze unwavering. Then, slowly, she smiled. I don't understand, she murmured. I like this. I frowned. What? Being yours, she said simply. Being under your control. I barely had time to process that before she squirmed beneath me, the movement, way too intentional, sending a flush of heat up my neck. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, she lifted her arms, bringing the chain of the cuffs behind my neck. And pulled me in closer. Because this means I'm yours, right? She whispered, her breath warm against my face. My pulse spiked. That. I swallowed. That wasn't my intention. Rachel's smile only widened. If you want to imprison me and take care of me, then do it. Her voice dipped slightly, turning lower, softer. I give you consent, okay? She leaned in. Her lips nearly brushed mine. I stopped her. My finger pressed against her lips, my breath uneven. And then. Rachel's eyes glinted. And she sucked on my damn finger. A sharp jolt ran down my spine, sending an actual shiver through me. I bolted out of the bed. My heart was racing. My brain had short-circuited. Rachel licked her lips, tilting her head in mock innocence. What's wrong? I stared at her, pulse still hammering. Luna, I called out mentally, desperate for guidance. Silence. Then. You bastard, Luna hissed. What the hell did you do to the Saintess? Chapter 275, Second Mission Interlude, 4. Hey, stop blaming me unfairly. I protested. Unfairly? Unfairly? Luna's voice rose in sheer indignation. Not only did I have to witness the Saintess, the future Saintess, mind you, this possessive over a man, but now she's also kinky. Oh Lord. I have made a mistake. I have chosen the wrong one. Please, grant me forgiveness. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Who the hell are you even praying to? Luna ignored me. I took a slow, steadying breath and looked back at Rachel, who was still sprawled on the bed, wrists cuffed, golden hair fanned out over the pillows. She was watching me with an expression that was far too satisfied, as if she enjoyed watching me suffer. I gulped. And then the magnetic door slid open. "Rachel, I was looking for you." Alastor Creighton stepped inside. I stiffened. Why is a king searching for her personally instead of having his staff do it? Or, I don't know, calling her phone like a normal human being? I cursed internally as my brain scrambled for an exit strategy. Alastor's eyes landed on me. Then they drifted to Rachel. To the bed. To the cuffs. The absolute silence in the room was deafening. And then the King of Creighton smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not an amused smile. A smile that carried the exact same energy as a man about to execute someone for high treason. His eyes, however, were very much not smiling. In the end, Rachel was freed, her cuffs turned to dust with nothing but a flick of Alastor's fingers. A terrifyingly casual display of power. And now? Now, I was sitting across from the very same man on a private balcony, a place without witnesses, which was not at all ominous. The table between us was modest, a simple wooden structure that felt deeply out of place when occupied by a man who could probably turn the entire estate to dust if he got irritated enough. Alastor sat there, arms crossed, staring at me with an intensity that suggested he was actively trying to set my skull on fire with sheer willpower. I, being the reasonable person I was, responded with a polite, utterly nonchalant smile. "Arthur Nightingale," he said at last, his voice level. I sat up instantly. Alastor held my gaze for a moment longer, then sighed, leaning back in his chair. "You've grown stronger." I nodded. "Yes." He made a thoughtful sound, glancing out over the darkened horizon. "That fight with the bishop," he mused. "You survived." I raised an eyebrow. Would we be having this conversation if I hadn't? Alastor let out something between a snort and a sigh, shaking his head. "You remind me of myself at your age. Annoyingly confident. Too reckless for your own good." I tilted my head. "And yet, you still train me." He smirked slightly. "I never said I disliked it." For a brief moment, the tension between us lessened. But only slightly. "You've made powerful enemies," he said, voice dropping slightly. "And you've already crossed paths with a bishop. The cult won't forget that." "I don't expect them to," I replied evenly. Alastor studied me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Good." The conversation settled into silence for a moment, the distant sounds of the city below a stark contrast to the quiet weight of our discussion. Finally, Alastor broke the silence. "So?" His gaze flicked back to mine, his expression unreadable. "How serious are you about Rachel?" I blinked. And then, for the second time that night, I seriously reconsidered my life choices. I met Alastor's gaze, his question hanging in the air between us like a poised blade. "How serious are you about Rachel?" The weight behind it was clear. He wasn't just asking about feelings. He was asking about intentions. About the future. About whether I had any idea what I had gotten myself into. I took a measured breath, my mind running through possible answers, all while keeping my face as unreadable as possible. "I like her," I said simply. Alastor's expression didn't change. "That's not what I asked." I sighed. "Of course it wasn't." "She's important to me," I continued, carefully picking my words. "More than just as an ally. More than just as a Creighton. She's Rachel, and that alone makes her." I stopped myself. Alastor's eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Makes her what?" I met his gaze evenly. "Makes her worth protecting." Silence. Then, to my surprise, he chuckled. It was a low sound, dry, but not entirely unfriendly. "You really are an interesting one." I raised an eyebrow. "Interesting?" A normal boy your age would either run from a noble's daughter or throw himself at her feet, Alastor mused. Yet here you are, sitting across from me like this is just another strategy meeting. I shrugged. It is. Alastor let out another chuckle, shaking his head. You remind me of a younger version of myself. Again, you did train me, I pointed out. And I sometimes wonder if that was a mistake, he muttered. I smirked slightly. Too late now. He studied me for a long moment before leaning forward, his expression turning more serious. Rachel isn't just some noble girl, Arthur. She's my daughter. She's the heir to one of the strongest families in the world. She was supposed to be tied to the hero's destiny, yet she chose you instead. His fingers drummed against the table once more. I need to know, he continued, voice sharp, if you understand what that means. I exhaled, leaning back in my chair. I understand that Rachel is her own person, I said. And I understand that her feelings for me aren't just a passing phase. Alastor's lips pressed into a thin line. But I also understand, I added, that this isn't something you can control. You may be her father, and you may be king, but Rachel made her choice. His eyes darkened slightly. And if I don't approve? I held his gaze. Then I suppose we'll have a problem. For a second, the tension crackled again, a sharp contrast to the calm night air. Then Alastor laughed. It was short, almost incredulous, but genuine. Rachel was right about you, he said, shaking his head. You really don't fear anything, do you? I smiled, though I made sure it didn't look too smug. Fear is useful. But not when it stops you from standing your ground. Alastor's smirk lingered for a moment before he exhaled, leaning back. Very well, he said. But if you ever break her heart. I won't, I interrupted. He paused. Studied me. Then nodded. Good. But you have to be careful, Alastor said, his voice carrying that far too knowing weight that only came with age and experience. After all, 3 other girls are madly in love with you as well. And you want all 4 of them, don't you? I met his gaze without hesitation. Yes. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't even try to hide it. There was no point in hiding it, I shrugged. Alastor let out a short, dry laugh, shaking his head. Well, I won't grill you on how you plan to achieve that. I'm too old for teenage love dramas. I almost sighed in relief. Almost. Then. My concern now is the Inter-Academy Festival, Alastor continued, leaning forward slightly. You'll be facing Lucifer again. A beat of silence. Then, calmly, he asked, can you win? I pursed my lips. A month ago, the answer would have been no. I wouldn't have admitted it out loud, but the truth was, the odds had been stacked against me. Lucifer wasn't just the strongest at Mythos Academy, he was fated for greatness. The protagonist. A walking storm, a force that seemed inevitable. And yet. I nodded. Alastor's eyes narrowed slightly. You think you can win? Yes. Before, my chances had been incredibly low. But not anymore. Because I had soul resonance. Because I had lucent harmony. Because I had Erebus, God Flash, Deep Dark, and Pure Light. I had reached a point where I could no longer be dismissed as just another opponent. I wouldn't lose. Alastor studied me for a long moment, as if trying to see past the confidence, trying to decide if I believed what I was saying or if I was just another arrogant boy who didn't know what he was up against. Then, finally, he smirked. Looks like you're going to shock the world once more, he said. He leaned back, watching me with something almost like amusement. I'll be watching. Chapter 276, Second Mission Interlude, 5. With my coma behind me and fall break officially started, it was time to get back to work. Of course, before that, I had a slightly more pressing matter to handle, namely, the 3 other girls who had been blocked from seeing me while I was unconscious. By Rachel. For an entire month. I was now sitting at a lounge in Creighton Estate, surrounded by 4 very different, but equally dangerous, women. Rachel, of course, sat beside me, looking smug and unapologetic. Cecilia, on the other hand, sat directly across from her, arms folded, her golden curls shining under the soft lighting. Her usual teasing smirk was absent. Instead, she radiated the kind of calm that only came before a storm. "So," Cecilia drawled, tilting her head, her piercing gaze locked onto Rachel. "You kidnapped my darling Arthur for an entire month." Rachel sipped her tea, utterly unbothered. "I nursed him back to health." "You imprisoned him." Rachel shrugged. "Semantics." Cecilia exhaled slowly, gripping her teacup with far more force than necessary. "Do you have any idea how close I was to declaring war?" I nearly choked on my own drink. "What?" Cecilia turned to me with a sigh, waving a delicate hand. "Well, obviously, I wouldn't have actually started a war. But I did consider it." I blinked. "That doesn't make it better." Serafina, who had been silent up until now, took a slow sip of her tea before speaking. "I wouldn't have gone that far," she said in her usual quiet tone, "but I was considering a more subtle retaliation." That didn't sound comforting at all. Rachel sighed dramatically. "Come on, it wasn't that bad." "Rachel," Rose finally spoke up, giving her a disapproving look. "You literally kept him cuffed." "Only sometimes." "For a month." "Fine," Rachel muttered, looking away. "Maybe a little bad." "A little," Serafina repeated, her brow twitching ever so slightly. I pinched the bridge of my nose. "Let's move on." Cecilia let out an exaggerated sigh, finally turning her full attention to me. "Well, now that you're finally free," she shot Rachel a pointed look, "are you at least feeling better?" I nodded. "Yeah. Stronger, too." Serafina's gaze softened slightly as she set her cup down. "It's been a while since we last spoke properly," she murmured. I turned to her, meeting her ice-blue eyes. "Yeah," I admitted. "It has." A moment of quiet passed between us. Serafina wasn't the type to voice her emotions outright, but there was a lot unsaid in the way she looked at me. The last time we had truly spoken, things had been left unsteady. I sighed. "Serafina, You don't need to say it," she interrupted gently. "I understand." But she still smiled. And for Serafina, that was enough. Cecilia clapped her hands together. "Good. Now that we've all made up, let's talk about something important. How exactly are we getting back at Rachel for this?" Rachel groaned. "Oh, come on. I honestly think that if something bad happened to you, a world war would break out," Luna mused in my mind. I ignored her. "Anyway, Arthur," Rose said, smoothly tuning out the ongoing bickering between Rachel and Cecilia. "How did you end up in a coma to begin with?" I told them everything. The corruption of the Red Knot Guild. The infiltration of the cult. My battle against a bishop. And, of course, Reka Solien. Serafina cut in immediately. "Reka?" A crack rang through the air. We all turned just in time to see Cecilia setting down a teacup, or what was left of it. A fracture ran clean through the ceramic, a small piece chipping off. Cecilia, however, didn't look the least bit bothered. "Oh, sorry," she said, voice light, turning to Rachel. "My bad." Rachel, who had definitely noticed, merely sipped her tea. "It's all right." Cecilia gave a small smile, but her next words were drenched in pure, weaponized irritation. "It's just that Arthur keeps seducing more women and increasing competition, which is, how do I put this, annoying." Her crimson eyes flicked to me, sharp as laser sights. I immediately raised my hands. "No, I didn't do that." "You didn't?" Cecilia drawled. "Reka doesn't like me," I said firmly. Rose sighed. You didn't tell him? She asked Rachel. Rachel, who had the audacity to look guilty, averted her gaze. No. Serafina muttered something under her breath. Evil saintess. Rachel blushed. Anyway, Cecilia leaned back, still looking far too amused. That Reka girl? After us, she was the most insistent person trying to see you while you were unconscious. I frowned. What? Maybe even more than us. That got my full attention. What? After all, Cecilia said, tilting her head, you're her knight in shining armor. Her savior. Well done, Arthur. She clapped, a slow, deliberate motion. She was smiling. But her eyes told me a very different story. I seduced her. I just saved her life. If anything, I probably should have scared her instead. That would have been the reasonable outcome. No, you dumbass, Luna groaned, exasperation thick in her tone. In her eyes, you were willing to throw your life away fighting for her. And, objectively speaking, you seem to have a handsome face by human standards, so it's obvious she fell for you. I am 100% sure that is not the case, I responded, completely certain. Just accept your goddamn fate already, Luna sighed, like a being that had long given up hope. I sighed, too. Internally. At least I wasn't alone in my suffering. Across the table, Rose placed a firm hand over mine, her brown eyes filled with the rare, sincere kind of concern. No more, Arthur. I blinked. What? No more, she repeated, tightening her grip. You're already surrounded by these three. Rachel, Cecilia, and Serafina all turned to her with identical expressions of pure indignation. Rose ignored them. And if you get any more possessive girls like them, you will not survive. I thought about denying it. Then I thought about the past 24 hours. Then I decided that Rose had a very valid point. Anyway, Cecilia coughed, sitting up a little straighter. I do have one important question. I already didn't like where this was going. Do you like being cuffed? I closed my eyes. Breathed in. Breathed out. Opened them. Closed them again. Then finally exhaled through my nose. All four of them were staring at me expectantly. Even Rachel, who I had specifically told that I hated being cuffed, looked like she was hoping for a different answer. No. Cecilia and Rachel actually sulked. Meanwhile, Serafina, who had been completely neutral in this conversation so far, subtly moved her fingers. A soft, crystalline glint flickered between them. I chose, for the sake of my sanity, to pretend I didn't see it. I didn't see that, I told myself firmly. And for the preservation of my already fragile peace of mind, would continue to not see it. The conversation, much to my dismay, did not move on from my apparent dislike of being restrained. Are you sure you don't like it? Cecilia pressed, twirling a lock of golden hair between her fingers. Positive. Not even a little? Rachel added, leaning forward slightly, her sapphire eyes gleaming with interest. Absolutely not. So if we tied you up and... Rachel, Rose cut in, rubbing her temple, please stop. Fine, Rachel huffed, pouting. But I still think he might change his mind someday. I gave her a flat look. Don't hold your breath. Serafina, for her part, had remained quiet, though she looked suspiciously pleased with herself. Which, given her usual composure, was honestly more concerning than if she had joined in. I was about to change the subject entirely when the magnetic doors to the lounge slid open with a soft hiss. A man in deep navy robes stepped inside, his posture formal but tense. Rachel turned her head. What is it? The mage bowed slightly. Apologies for the interruption, Lady Creighton. But someone important has just arrived at the estate. Rachel raised an eyebrow. How important? The mage hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough that even I felt the shift in atmosphere. The Martial King has requested an audience with Arthur Nightingale, he said at last. Silence. Absolute, utter silence. Then. Who? I asked, blinking. The mage's expression didn't change. The Martial King. Rank 1 in the world. A slow, creeping realization set in. Cecilia lowered her teacup. Seraphina's fingers stilled. Rose straightened. Rachel, to her credit, maintained a relatively composed expression, except for the slight widening of her eyes. He wants to meet Arthur, she clarified. The mage nodded. Yes, my lady. He specifically requested Arthur Nightingale. 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. I stared back, my brain still processing the fact that the strongest individual on the entire planet was apparently in this very estate, and, for some reason, had specifically requested to meet me. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 277, Second Mission Interlude, 6. Who was the Martial King? Magnus Drakkar. A man born in the northern continent, the sole mid-radiant ranker in the world, a rank above all others, standing alone at the absolute peak of human power. He had forged his own grade 6 sword art, carving a path that no one else had walked in his generation. The man who had saved the western continent in the past. A legend. Rank 1. And he was here, at the Creighton estate. To meet me. Alastair Creighton wasn't present to greet him. Neither was Rachel's older sister. That left Rachel to handle the formalities, accompanied by Kalon, the estate's strongest mage, a high immortal rank powerhouse, and the official security measure for anyone who dared step onto Creighton territory. And, of course, there was me. And the 3 other girls who were definitely not going to let me face the most powerful man in the world alone. We stepped into the elevator, the ride down heavy with tension none of us wanted to acknowledge. Finally, the doors slid open. And there he was. A man stood in the grand reception hall, hands casually tucked into his pockets, posture relaxed, almost bored. Dark green hair. Matching eyes. A presence that was both unassuming and utterly commanding. His aura wasn't suffocating. It wasn't even imposing. It was something worse. It was contained. We could all tell. The sheer, incomparable power humming beneath the surface, the kind that didn't need to be flaunted. The kind that could be unleashed at any given moment, with terrifying precision. Rachel stepped forward first, her voice steady. Greetings, Martial King. She bowed, and we all followed suit. I, Rachel Creighton, second princess of the Creighton family, welcome you to our estate. Magnus glanced at her, eyes flickering with the briefest spark of recognition. You've grown, he noted. Then, slowly, his gaze moved. Over Cecilia. Over Seraphina. Over Rose. Over Kalon. Finally, his eyes settled on me. And then. He smiled. A small, almost amused curl of his lips. I am here to greet just one man, he said, voice calm, yet carrying weight. Arthur Nightingale. Rachel didn't even hesitate. May I ask why? For the first time, the Martial King looked genuinely taken aback. Then, he laughed. A short, quiet chuckle, as if the answer should have been obvious. I wanted to meet the greatest genius of this generation, he said simply. And perhaps, even train him myself. Silence. Train me? I echoed. He nodded. After all, he said, his tone utterly casual, who wouldn't want to play a role in the making of the next paragon of humanity? Magnus Drakkar was not a man who wasted time. Within minutes of his arrival, we were in a private room, just the 2 of us. No guards. No surveillance. No unnecessary formalities. Just me and the strongest man in the world. He leaned against the window, arms crossed, his dark green eyes watching me with something close to amusement. You're not nervous, he noted. I met his gaze evenly. Should I be? His smirk widened slightly. Most would be. I'm not most people. Magnus chuckled. No. You certainly aren't. He pushed off the window and walked forward, each step deliberate, carrying a weight that I could feel, even if he wasn't exerting his full presence. I didn't come here on a whim, Arthur, he said, voice calm. You've made waves. Big ones. And if what I've heard is true, then you're more than just talented, you're dangerous. I didn't respond. Because he was right. Magnus studied me for a long moment before nodding to himself. I will train you. I blinked. Just like that? Just like that, he confirmed. During winter break, you'll come with me. I'll teach you personally. I exhaled slowly. Why? His lips curled slightly. Because I want to see if you're truly worthy. Something in his tone sent a thrill through me. Worthy. Not just to be trained. Not just to be acknowledged. If you prove yourself, Magnus continued, you can become my disciple. I felt my heartbeat quicken. This wasn't just training. This was a chance to learn under the strongest human alive. A man who had no equals. A man who had reached the absolute peak and kept climbing. An opportunity that no one had ever been given before. I didn't hesitate. I accept. Magnus' smirk returned. Good. Then. His expression darkened, just slightly. But understand this, he said. If you accept, there's no turning back. My training isn't kind. It isn't fair. And if you think you've pushed yourself before? His eyes gleamed. You haven't even begun. I clenched my fists. I know. Magnus watched me for a beat longer. Then. He laughed. All right then, Arthur Nightingale, he said, stepping back. Let's see if you have what it takes to reach the top. Underscore 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 underscore. After my conversation with Magnus Drakkar, my fall break could finally begin in earnest. Or at least, what was left of it. 3 days had already vanished, which meant I had barely a week left before the relentless pace of Mythos Academy resumed. Still, there was one thing I had to do first, return to Avalon. I wasn't going alone, though. Cecilia and Rose were heading back as well, so we ended up taking the same transport. Which, of course, meant we were currently sitting in a ridiculously luxurious car that had come to pick up Cecilia, because of course the Slatemark princess had something this extravagant just lying around for personal travel. Cecilia stretched lazily beside me, her golden curls shimmering under the soft interior lighting, before clapping her hands together as if remembering something. Oh. Right, Arthur, I had something to tell you. I glanced at her. What is it? She smiled. Because of your hard work in dismantling the Red Knot Guild in Redmond and for managing to deal significant damage to a bishop, you're being awarded a medal for merit. I inhaled sharply. The Medal for Merit. One of the highest civilian honors in the entire Slatemark Empire. The ceremony is scheduled for January 19th, Cecilia continued casually, as if she hadn't just dropped a massive piece of information. Basically, right at the end of our winter break. She smirked. Congratulations, but don't make it a habit. I exhaled, shaking my head. I won't. Across from us, Rose smiled before speaking up. Arthur, she said, her emerald eyes warm, would you be my date for an event my family is hosting this week? I raised an eyebrow. An event? We're celebrating our noble title's ascension, she explained. My family's rank is being elevated from Count to Marquis. I nodded. That was big. A title shift like that wasn't just an honor, it was a political statement. Sure, I said. Just send me the details, and I'll work it into my schedule. Rose's smile brightened. Thank you. And congratulations, I added. That's huge for your family. She dipped her head slightly, still smiling. It is. And I'm glad you'll be there. Cecilia sighed dramatically, stretching her arms. Another event, another fancy party. Well, at least it'll be interesting with you around, Arthur. But you won't be coming, right? I asked, glancing at Cecilia. She tilted her head, golden curls shifting slightly as she smirked. Oh, I absolutely will. I raised an eyebrow. Really? She nodded. Rose's family is becoming a marquis. I have to be there. I suppose that made sense. The Slatemark Empire had a vested interest in keeping tabs on rising noble houses within its territory. Cecilia attending would reinforce the importance of the event. Serafina and Rachel won't, though, she added. That also made sense. Rachel and Serafina were princesses of entirely different continents. It would take a far more significant event for the Slatemark Empire to warrant their attendance. Rose turned to me. Anyway, what are you planning to do with the rest of your break? Work, I replied simply. I need to catch up on studying, finalize things with Reka. Cecilia's lips curled into a knowing smile. Reka again. I sighed. There's nothing going on with her. Cecilia's crimson eyes drilled into me, utterly unconvinced. I just need to get her officially into my guild, I clarified. Callie told me she tried handling it, but apparently, Reka insisted on talking to me personally before joining. Rose, who had been quiet up until now, casually leaned back in her seat. Pretty sus. I blinked. Rose too. Rose shrugged, sipping her drink. I'm just saying, girls don't usually hesitate this much over a simple guild decision. Sounds like she wants to discuss something else with you, asterisk. I exhaled through my nose. You're both reading too much into this, I muttered. Cecilia simply smirked. We'll see. Chapter 278, Reka Solien, 5. I was finally home. Not that it felt like I'd been away for long, being in a coma for over a month had a way of warping one's sense of time. Slatemark Academy had its fall break at the same time as Mythos Academy, so my younger sister, Arya, was home as well. Our parents, however, were busier than ever, both deeply involved in work in Minerva, which meant the house was mostly just the two of us. And, of course, that meant I had no peace. Brother, I wanted to ask you something, Arya said between massive bites of pizza, absolutely devouring her slice like it was her last meal on Earth. I watched her with mild horror. Sure, but can you at least pretend you weren't raised in a barn? She ignored me, shoving the last of the pizza into her mouth before grabbing her soda and chugging it like she'd just crawled out of a desert. I sighed. Arya. Are you dating all four of them? I froze. Slowly, I turned to face her. What makes you say that? She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, tilting her head. Because they fought. A lot. I blinked. They fought? Yeah, she nodded. Well, Rose didn't fight much, but the three princesses? Total war zone. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Of course they did. Cecilia even brought Imperial Knights, Arya continued, completely unfazed. And Serafina? She literally brought Mount Hua elders to force Rachel to open the doors of the estate. I stared at her. Then swallowed. Crazy, I muttered, exhaling slowly. So? Arya pressed. Are you actually dating all of them? I glanced at her, debating whether or not to lie. Then, finally, I sighed. Yes. Aria's eyes widened. Wow. Then. Her face lit up. I'm gonna be sisters-in-law with all those celebrities. I blinked. That's your takeaway? Oh, and I'm gonna have the cutest nephews and nieces now, she continued, looking genuinely excited. That's insane. Then, abruptly, her expression turned serious. But seriously, she looked me dead in the eyes. You won't die, right? No, I replied, leaning back slightly. In the end, they still care for me. Aria studied me for a moment before nodding. Yeah, I figured. She took another massive bite of pizza, barely pausing before adding, Rachel was literally healing you non-stop with her Saintess gift. I exhaled. That, too, was something I had pieced together. Rachel's gift was unlike any other in the world, far surpassing even other Pure Light users, despite her only being at white rank. In the original novel, she was powerful enough to heal immortal rank Lucifer. And, as it turned out, she was the reason I survived my coma. But still. Aria muttered, tapping her fingers against the table. She seemed possessive. I gave her a flat look. Seemed? She hesitated, then sighed. Fine. She was possessive. I don't want to say it, but for a while, we actually thought she was going crazy. I shrugged. It's normal now. That's not normal, Aria pointed out, before pausing. Wait. Do you mean normal as in, it's fine now? Or normal as in, this is just how she is now? Yes. Aria groaned, rubbing her temple. Great. Well, whatever. I just don't want you to die before you give me my adorable nieces and nephews. She sighed dramatically before promptly returning to devouring her pizza like it had personally wronged her. I watched for a moment, unimpressed. When you said you wanted a large pizza for yourself, I thought you were joking. Aria didn't even look up. And? I narrowed my eyes. Don't get fat. Ugh, shut up, she grumbled between bites, completely unbothered. I shook my head and stood up, brushing imaginary dust off my clothes. Anyway, I'm heading out. Aria waved a lazy hand. See ya. I stepped outside, the cool night air greeting me. It was time to meet Reika Solien. I invited her to a good restaurant. Nothing absurdly extravagant, none of those ridiculous $5,000 coffee places where you were probably paying more for atmosphere than the drink itself, but still a nice place. Somewhere comfortable. Somewhere where the food was actually worth the price. I arrived first and took a seat, waiting. It didn't take long before Reika arrived. Hey, she greeted, slipping into the chair opposite me. She looked nervous. Not in the way someone might be if they were about to discuss something serious, but in the way someone felt out of place. Her hands twitched slightly as she adjusted herself, eyes darting to the elegant setting before resting on the table. I wasn't surprised. Her family wasn't exactly well off. Don't worry, I said easily, leaning back. I'll cover it. Reika exhaled slightly, nodding. Thanks. We made small talk for a bit, basic things, nothing too serious, but I wasn't here to waste time. So, I said, cutting straight to the point, why do you not want to sign with us? Reika hesitated for a moment before meeting my gaze. I wanted to see you, she admitted. I raised an eyebrow. Why? Her violet eyes held something I couldn't quite read. I'm willing to join Ouroboros, she said, voice steady. But I want to work for you directly. I studied her for a moment. Is that your decision? She nodded. Okay. She blinked. That's it? I reached into my jacket and pulled out a sleek, high-tech ID card, sliding it across the table. This is your 5-star adventurer license, I said casually. Reika picked it up, eyes widening slightly. Already? You can reach white rank when using your gift, right? I asked. She nodded slowly. Then you qualify for it, I said. And I'll be giving you some potions to fix your body further. That way, your base level can reach silver rank without over-relying on your gift. Reika tightened her grip on the ID. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you." Before I could respond, our food arrived. She hesitated for a moment before picking up her utensils, glancing at me. I gestured for her to eat, and she did, though I could tell she was still thinking about something. It didn't take long before she finally spoke up again. "Why did you save me?" I took a bite, chewing thoughtfully before answering. "Because I saw myself in you." She froze slightly, her fork pausing just above her plate. I exhaled slowly, setting my own utensils down. "I know what it's like," I continued. "To be powerless. To have no say in your own life. To be treated like nothing more than a tool, a weapon meant for someone else's gain." Her grip on her fork tightened. I leaned forward slightly. "I promise to help you get your revenge. And I don't break my promises." Reika's expression shifted. Something sharp flickered in her eyes, something buried deep. She swallowed, lowering her gaze slightly. "You really mean that?" I nodded. "I do." She exhaled shakily, before managing a small, almost uncertain smile. "Then I'll hold you to it." "It's a deal," I said, extending my hand. Reika hesitated, her violet eyes flickering with something unreadable. Then, finally, she pursed her lips and shook my hand. "There. Officially part of Ouroboros." But we both knew that was just the first step. "I'll need protection, won't I?" she asked after a pause. "And your family," I nodded. "Living in Avalon is already a strong layer of defense, but it's not enough. You'll need to transfer out of Mavern Academy." Her brow furrowed slightly. "Transfer where?" "Slate Mark Academy." Her lips parted slightly, as if the idea hadn't even crossed her mind. "In Avalon, they won't dare touch you," I continued. "Of course, I'll have additional security measures in place just in case, but Slate Mark Academy is safer than anywhere else for now." Reika exhaled, nodding slightly. "Thank you. But..." She hesitated, frowning. "How would I even transfer there?" I arched an eyebrow. "You have a gift, Reika. That alone gives you enough credibility to apply. But not yet, wait until winter break." She blinked. "Why wait?" "Because by then," I said, my voice steady, "you need to reach base silver rank. That way, with your gift, you'll be able to reach integration rank when needed. It'll cement your position at Slate Mark Academy. No one will question your place there." She swallowed. "And until then?" "You won't be attending Mavern Academy anymore," I said simply. "You'll be doing your classes in the Tower of Magic instead. It's safer, more controlled. Less room for unexpected problems." Reika's fingers curled slightly against the table. It was a lot to take in. But she wasn't protesting. She was considering it. And that was enough. Chapter 279, Reika Solien, 6. "I'll do as you say," Reika said, her voice steady. "I only wish to serve you." I blinked. That is a weird goal. Scratching my cheek, I watched as she simply smiled, tilting her head slightly. "I don't believe so. Regardless, if that means joining Ouroboros, I shall do so." "Great," I said, clapping my hands together. "Glad we're on the same page." She nodded, still watching me with an expression that was far too composed. "Anyway," I continued, leaning forward slightly. "I have some information for you." Reika's brow furrowed slightly. "Information?" I nodded. "As you know, the cult isn't just some scattered organization, it's an empire in the shadows, deeply rooted and incredibly powerful. But not all of it is after you." Her fingers twitched slightly against the table. So who is? Your project, I met her gaze, was under the jurisdiction of one of their cardinals. Cardinal Akasha. Her lips parted slightly as she echoed the name. Cardinal Akasha. In terms of raw strength, he isn't particularly remarkable among the cardinals, I continued, but he is ambitious. And right now? He's way too strong for the current you to even imagine winning against. Reka clenched her fists, her violet eyes flashing with something cold. I understand. She exhaled softly, before meeting my gaze again. I'll do my best to become strong enough. I smiled. Good. We finished our meal, and if Reka's expression was anything to go by, she'd really enjoyed it. She looked better. Not just physically, but mentally. No signs of lingering trauma surfacing. No discomfort from resurfaced memories. It was surprising, considering how much she had buried her past. I studied her for a moment, thoughtful. She should have struggled more with this. It's because of you, Luna piped up in my mind. I promptly ignored her. Instead, I leaned back slightly and said, let's go to Ouroboros, shall we? Reka nodded, setting down her utensils and standing with me. The ride to the guild wasn't long, and when we arrived, the sight that greeted us was one I still wasn't fully used to. The building we had acquired for Ouroboros had undergone a complete transformation, thanks to the sheer effort put in by Elias and Callie. What had once been a barely passable base for a fledgling bronze-rank guild was now a proper headquarters, sleek, fortified, and fitted with the best technology we could get our hands on. And it wasn't just the infrastructure that had improved. We had people now. A lot more than before. Ouroboros was growing. Reka followed me inside, glancing around with subtle curiosity. This was the first time she was really stepping into what would be her new home. Callie was waiting for us, leaning against the main desk with her arms crossed, her dark gaze settling on Reka the second we entered. So, she said, lips curling slightly, she finally shows up. Reka stiffened slightly but held her ground. I wanted to speak to Arthur first. Callie tilted her head, amused. And? Did he pass your test? Reka hesitated. Something like that. Callie smirked but didn't push further. Instead, she straightened and held out a sleek, hollow tablet. Sign here. Officially makes you one of us. Reka took the tablet, her fingers hovering over the interface for a second before she pressed her signature into the digital contract. The tablet beeped softly in confirmation. Callie nodded in satisfaction. Welcome to Ouroboros. Reka exhaled, as if she hadn't fully realized the weight of her decision until just now. I patted her shoulder. You'll be fine. Callie's smirk returned. We'll see. Don't be mean, Callie, I said, sighing. Callie shrugged, crossing her arms. Well, at least you didn't blackmail her this time? She shot me a pointed look. Reka blinked, visibly surprised, before shaking her head. No. Arthur has been good to me. I just wish to repay him. Well, that makes one of you, Callie muttered under her breath before moving on. Anyway, Arthur already explained everything, so your workload won't be much outside of school breaks. During those, you'll be taking missions, mostly to build your personal battle experience. I nodded. That much was obvious. I hadn't recruited Reka because she was strong now. It was because of her potential. Callie leaned against the desk, tapping her fingers against the surface. So, that makes 3 out of 4, huh? I nodded. Reka tilted her head. 3 out of 4? For special talents, Callie explained. You, Elias Vance, and Jean Ashbluff. Reka's brows shot up. Wait, Prince Jean Ashbluff? We both nodded. She blinked, processing it. Then, just accepted it. No drawn-out questions. No skepticism. I liked her. Callie smirked. So, Who's the last? I scratched the back of my head. The most special of them all. Callie raised an eyebrow. And when are you planning to recruit them? In the future. Reka, who had been quiet, finally spoke. The most special? I nodded. Don't worry. I'll get her. My lips pressed into a thin line. Because unlike the others, this one would be different. God, what are you planning now? Callie groaned, sinking back into her chair. I'm telling you right now, don't involve me. I raised an eyebrow. You know I can't get her alone, right? She glared at me, unamused. May I ask who you're talking about? Reka asked, watching us both. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I pulled out my phone. The silence stretched as I tapped a few buttons. Then, just as they were about to press me again, the door slid open. Elias stepped inside, hands in his pockets. You called? I nodded. Sit. He did, settling into the chair across from me as I reached for the console embedded in the table. A single press of a button activated the technological soundproof barrier, an invisible field humming to life around us. Secretive, huh? Callie mused. I nodded. This isn't something we can afford anyone else hearing. I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands together. Do you know about the first calamity, the heavenly demon? The reaction was immediate. Callie stiffened. Reka inhaled sharply. Elias's usual easygoing demeanor vanished, his expression hardening. Of course, they reacted that way. Everyone knew about him. The first calamity, the singular being who had brought the entire world to its knees. The unstoppable force that had shattered humanity's golden age, wiping out millions and requiring the combined might of every nation, every guild, and every legend just to contain him. And even then, he had not been defeated by war. He had only been slain by the first hero. Of course we know, Elias said, his voice quieter than usual. Who doesn't? Then you also know about the Order of the Fallen Flame, I continued. The remnants of the heavenly demon sect that rebranded themselves after their leader's fall. They all nodded. The Order of the Fallen Flame hadn't been idle. Their influence had resurged in recent years, and their most notable attack had been against the Tower of Magic itself. Well, I said, tapping the table, they're trying to revive him. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Reka's fingers curled slightly. Elias narrowed his eyes. Callie's mouth opened slightly before closing again. Then, finally, she spoke. What? Revive the heavenly demon? Her voice wavered slightly, something I never heard from Callie. Arthur, you better be joking. No, actually, maybe it would be better if this was a joke. I wish I was joking. I sighed. But it's true. I didn't tell them how I knew. There are two major plans in motion right now, I continued. Two ways they're trying to bring him back. Reka's voice was quiet. And what are you planning to do? I smiled. Steal one of them. Elias blinked. You want to steal a method for resurrecting the first calamity? Yes. Callie laughed, except there was no humor in it. You're actually insane. Maybe, I admitted. But after what they did in the summer? After trying to hurt me? I think it's time I returned the favor. I leaned back, my smirk fading slightly. That said, I continued, we're all still too weak. This isn't something I can rush. I'll proceed with this plan when Ouroboros reaches gold rank, and when I can beat a high ascendant ranker on my own. Their reactions varied. Callie rubbed her temples like she had a headache. Elias leaned back in his chair, considering. Reka simply sat there, fingers twitching slightly against the fabric of her sleeve. They knew it was crazy. They also knew I wasn't changing my mind. So what's the plan until then? Elias finally asked. I smiled. We get stronger. Chapter 280, Rose Springshaper, 1. I studied my reflection as Mia, my maid, carefully applied makeup to my face. "I'm surprised, Lady Rose," she remarked, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "You actually seem to be enjoying dressing up." I smiled slightly. "It's not like I dislike it." Mia tilted her head. "Funny. Weren't you the one who told me that since I wouldn't be at the academy with you, there was no point in bothering with makeup?" I shrugged. Times change. Mia's eyes sparkled with knowing mischief. "Oh, I see now. It's that boy. Arthur, right?" I gave her a look. "Mia, are we done?" "Almost," she hummed, stepping back to admire her work. "After all, your competition is strong. You need to stand out." I blinked at her words. Stand out? My gaze flickered back to the mirror, and for a moment, I saw myself standing next to them. Next to Serafina, a girl with an ethereal, almost incomparable beauty. Next to Cecilia, who exuded a casual, effortless flirtation that made her irresistible. And next to Rachel, alluring, energetic, vibrant in a way that drew people in without even trying. A weight settled in my chest. Physically, standing out against them was impossible. Mia caught my expression in the mirror and clicked her tongue. "Don't be disheartened, my lady." I inhaled slowly. "I'm not disheartened." My reflection stared back at me, composed, elegant. "After all," I said, smoothing out my dress, "today is a celebration." Mia gave a satisfied nod as I stood, fully dressed and adorned. The diamond earrings and necklace gleamed under the soft lighting, perfectly complementing the pristine white dress that contrasted against my auburn hair and deep brown eyes. "We're done," Mia said with a bright smile. I took a final glance at myself in the mirror before stepping forward, sliding open the door and stepping out into the hallway. A knight was already waiting. He gave a small bow. "My lady, the Marquis is expecting you." I nodded and walked with him, my heels tapping softly against the polished floors. And then, I saw him. My father. Marquis Everett Springshaper stood tall, his expression calm yet warm as his sharp eyes settled on me. His auburn hair was neatly combed back, his brown eyes mirroring my own. Perhaps I had been lucky not to inherit my mother's features. "Rose," he greeted, a rare smile crossing his face. "You look beautiful." He extended his hand. I took it. Together, we began walking, our steps in sync as we made our way toward the Grand Hall. "Is today also the day I finally meet this Arthur Nightingale?" my father asked, his tone light but carrying a distinct weight of curiosity. I glanced up at him. "Perhaps." His smile deepened slightly. "I'm looking forward to it. After all." He tilted his head slightly, voice dropping into something more thoughtful. "He is an exceptional young man, is he not?" I exhaled. "To a certain degree." But that was an understatement. Arthur was beyond exceptional. The towering entrance to the Grand Hall loomed before us, its massive doors gilded in intricate patterns of enchanted silver. As we approached, the doors swung open with smooth, mechanical precision, revealing the dazzling interior. A herald in immaculate white and gold attire stepped forward, his voice carrying across the hall. "Presenting the Marquis of House Springshaper and his daughter, Lady Rose Springshaper." All eyes turned toward us as we entered, but mine sought out one in particular. And I found him immediately. Arthur stood near the center of the hall, dressed sharply, exuding an effortless confidence that made him stand out even in a room filled with royalty and nobility. His sharp, intelligent gaze flickered toward me, and for a brief second, I could see the moment he registered my presence. I smiled. Then, with a light wave, I greeted him. The moment we stepped fully into the hall, my father's presence commanded attention. Marquis Everett Springshaper was not a man easily ignored. His noble bearing, quiet confidence, and unwavering presence made him one of the most respected figures in the empire. And tonight, as the host of this event, he moved with the effortless grace of a man accustomed to power. The nobles flocked to him like moths to a flame. I stood by his side, offering practiced smiles and polite nods as a stream of guests approached. Marquis Springshaper, one of the high-ranking nobles, greeted with a deep bow. A most magnificent celebration. Your rise to Marquis is well-deserved. You honor me, my father responded smoothly, offering a firm handshake. But House Springshaper has only begun its ascent. I intend for us to prove our worth. A murmur of agreement passed through the surrounding nobles. From my periphery, I could see Arthur still watching, calm, composed, unreadable. I wondered what he was thinking. Then, another presence approached. A presence that instantly shifted the atmosphere. Marquis Springshaper, a melodic voice spoke. Your family's accomplishments are commendable. I turned to see Princess Cecilia Slatemark. Dressed in an elegant red and gold gown, she radiated a confident, teasing energy, her crimson eyes practically glowing under the hall's artificial lighting. It's good to see you, Cecilia, my father said, offering a respectful bow of his head. And I thank you for gracing this event with your presence. Oh, come now, Marquis, Cecilia smirked, as if I'd miss an event that Arthur was attending. Her gaze flickered toward Arthur for a brief moment before settling back on me. Congratulations on your family's ascension, Rose. I nodded. Thank you, Cecilia. Just then, the orchestra began to play a soft melody. The air shifted as the first dance of the evening approached. My father turned to me, his voice lowering slightly. It's time. I exhaled. I had expected this. My father had no desire to dance with me for the first waltz. No, he had already chosen who would be my partner for the opening dance. And there was only one person who made sense. I turned my gaze to Arthur. Arthur Nightingale, I said, my voice carrying across the small space between us. Would you grant me the honor of the first dance? Arthur blinked once before stepping forward, offering his hand to me with effortless grace. It would be my honor, he replied smoothly. I placed my hand in his, feeling the warmth of his touch as he led me toward the dance floor. The music swelled, and with the eyes of the entire noble society upon us, we danced. We had danced together many times before. We knew each other's rhythm, each other's pace. Our movements blended effortlessly, as natural as breathing, as fluid as thought. There was no hesitation, no misstep, only perfect synchronicity. Arthur led, and I followed, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my ear. You look really beautiful today. The words sent a shiver down my spine. Thank you, I murmured, my gaze meeting his. He looked as impossibly composed as ever, sharp, poised, exuding that quiet confidence that made it seem as if he always had everything under control. And I wanted him. I had him, but even now, even after everything, I still wanted him. By my side. For myself. Even when the past clawed at the edges of my mind. Even though I was the daughter of one of the 4 worst humans to ever walk this world. Even though I should have been unworthy. I desired him regardless. And I would give up everything for him. I wanted to be loved by him. Even if I didn't deserve it. Maybe I wasn't as easygoing as I had always pretended to be.